Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first Audit, Risk and Finance meeting of 2018. Good to have the new Chief Executive here, and good to see participation by non-member councillors at this committee, so welcome all. I've been asked to let you know, to remind you that we are being live streamed, and also to explain the new technology. It's the right-hand button, apparently, that connects us to the world. So I think that's what I need to do. So I'll call for apologies. We have no apologies. I've had a courtesy advice that Councillor Walker, who normally attends this meeting but is not a committee member, will not be joining us today, but that's purely as a courtesy. And I understand the Mayor will be attending but might be a bit late. So if there's no, could I ask that those apologies be sustained? Sorry?
No resolution.
Okay, we don't need to do that. Right, so then we'll go to the confirmation of the order of business. I think the logical thing is, there's no formal notice, but I think it's logical that we take items 9 and 11 one after the other, so that we can have Audit New Zealand stay at the table for both those items. So I'll move item 10 to after item 11 with the agreement of the meeting. Are there any interests, register updates, or any particular conflicts relating to items on this agenda? No, then we'll move to confirmation of the minutes of the 14th of November and ask if there are any changes or alterations to those minutes. If there aren't, could I have somebody move that they be accepted? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Seconded, Councillor Dahlberg. Any further items of discussion on that? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll move to the status report, page 17. And I'll ask who will take us through those. I think we'll just work through those. The tendering processes, there is an item on this agenda which will progress that, I feel. The key organisational risks, it was particularly a request on the organisation and business challenges resulting from staff shortages. Again, we have a report on that at this meeting, which hopefully will progress and finalise that. Tax risk management strategy, is there anything, St Donald, you want to add to that? This is the update to that, so we're just working through the scope of that, so presumably that will come back to us in due course, will it? Thank you. Health, safety and wellbeing quarterly report. Again, two reports are on that agenda: health and safety and wellbeing performance report, and the report on the incidents at council libraries, which I think was the other thing that we asked for. So that's progressed to a report at this meeting. And the protective disclosure for policy for elected members. Work underway for early 2018. Do you have any indication of when we're likely to see that?
Through the chair, probably at the next Audit, Risk and Finance committee meeting.
Thank you. So, is there any discussion on those items relating to those that aren't going to come up later in the course of the meeting? If there isn't, I ask that we receive that status report and the attachment. Mr Murray, thank you. Councillor Dahlberg, thank you. Any further discussion on that? Not all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Chairperson's report. Just a couple of things for me, particularly. Good morning, Madam Mayor. Looking at the audit letter for 2017, I just report to this committee that I have cited the Audit New Zealand letter to management as is the normal practice. I have gone through that with the Group Manager of Corporate Services. I'm satisfied that the matters are appropriate and that the management responses so far to that are appropriate. Key parts of that letter relate to the capital program and processes around capital, and I'm pleased to hear that those are under discussion, and also recent changes to the capital program by the new CEO and his team, bringing the target back to a more realistic process, I think is one that, while still ambitious, is much more realistic, and I think that is addressing a concern that I think we've had in this committee for some time about those ongoing annual gaps in the proposed and the actually achieved, have been a concern for some time in this committee, so I look forward to a closer correlation of the target. I think that's also important in relation to Audit New Zealand's proposed audit of the long-term plan, and the new approach hopefully will help address some of the issues relating to the capital commitments in that long-term plan. I have nothing further to say in my report. I move that my verbal report be received. Thank you, Councillor Goldberg. Any comments on my report? If not, those in favour, please aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. The Theatre Royal Loan, page 22. This is an item that's come back to this committee after some discussions, and we requested that this report be proceeded. Mr. Ward has joined us at the table. I would like to keep this discussion in the space of a moving forward discussion rather than relitigating the history, which we've had the opportunity to do on a number of occasions. So I would like to try and keep this as a, this is where we're at, this is the resolution. Is this the best solution to this ongoing issue that we have in front of us, so that we can try and reach resolution of this long outstanding item. So if we can keep that as a focus of the discussion, I'll appreciate that. So I'll hand over at this stage to Mr. Ward and ask if there's any changes, updates. Chris, you know how it works.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just make a clarification, if I may, on paragraph 5.6. The committee asked for further information on the level of the grant. It also asked for further information on similar grants and loans to the other organisations that are listed in that table, just for clarity. We have considered this matter over a period of time. I think we've got to the right place. The theatre are comfortable with the proposed repayments. They have also sent me separately, and I have an attachment I attached it for reasons of commercial confidentiality, but I can give a summary of their investment proposals in terms of the capital renewals that are required, and they've argued that they need some cash on hand in order to fund those renewals. So in this current financial year, there approximately 140,000 is being spent on seating and some other illumination and lighting in the theatre, so that's all funded from cash. And then over the next few years, there's a renewal schedule over the next 15 years of approximately $890,000. So they do have a significant renewal program. They do seem to have a plan in terms of managing their asset efficiently and to maintain it, but that does require them to fund that out of the cash. And so some of the figures that we saw previously in their accounts has actually been tagged to those improvements. So we're recommending a 60,000 repayment if council agrees to take on the loan from the Nelson Building Society. We believe that is sustainable in the long term, but we also believe we should review that every 5 years to ensure that if the trust does have capacity to pay more, then it can pay back that loan quicker. I'm happy to take the rest as read and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, 3 questions, if I may, Mr. Ward. The first question relates to the 632,000 that we're looking to refinance out of the Nelson Building Society. Question is not so much about that, but more about whether the City Council can afford 632,000 out of its balance sheet to fund this thing in the context of what we've got coming forward in the long-term plan, etc. Now, I'm not aware of what all of that looks like, but I'd be a little bit concerned about essentially raising debt, I presume, 632,000 to fund this, if we've then got to sacrifice what? And it's that bit that I'm a wee bit unclear about, and you may not be able to answer that today, but my question really come back to how are we going to fund this thing, and if it's from loan, how does that impact on our long-term plans with our debt levels, etc., etc. So that's the first question. Second question is around the $60,000 a year. Is that principal and interest repayment, or is that just principal and this is an interest-free loan? And that's the second question. And the third question has evaded me for now. Oh yes, the third question is, if we do agree to this, would it be possible in the loan documentation to make it very explicitly clear to the trustees that we are expecting them to adhere to this arrangement, and have them all sign off in the loan documentation that yes, they're agreeing to the 60,000 per year to come back this way, whether it's P&I or whether it's just P, I don't know. But is it possible to have them, as part of that loan documentation, to be saying, yes, we are committing to this and we will pay this?
Mr. Ward?
So I'll answer in reverse order, if I may, because that's probably going to be easier. Yes, absolutely, we can get the sign off, and as I've already attached to this report a letter from the chair, and I understand that has been discussed with the rest of the board, and they're comfortable with that. So we can make that a condition of the agreement. In terms of the loan, it is for the repayments are against principal only. It would be an interest-free loan, which is how we deal with other community organisation, not-for-profit loans. We have a loan with the Tuna Beach Camp, but that is a commercial organisation. That's the only one we actually take interest on. But the loans to community organisations, we generally don't. In terms of the funding impact, I may have to defer to the Group Manager of Corporate Services to answer that one, if I may.
Through the chair, we're obviously working through a long-term plan process at the moment, and we have a debt cap of 150% of revenue, and I'm comfortable that there is sufficient capacity within that relatively conservative limit to absorb this as debt.
Thank you, Mr. Donald. Any follow-up on that, Mr. Murray? Councillor Delberg.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question would be around the security of the loan document. So I'd really like to know, I think, if I recall, the previous loan, we've got no security on the building. And if this is going to be agreed to, can we actually attach some security to that?
Thank you, Councillor Delberg.
So through the chair, we currently have a mortgage against the property in relation to the current loan. The third clause of the recommendation to council is that we increase that mortgage over the building to cover the full amount of the loan.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Councillor Delberg, does that satisfy your inquiry?
Just that my memory sort of says that we really haven't got, shall I say, control on getting our component back out. I just want that reassurance that if something happens around there and we sell the thing because it stops functioning or whatever, do we get our 1.5 back, and do we get our new 632 back out? Because I know there was a a contingency on someone else getting the 150k back out that was loaned, and I remember that in the back of my mind. I'm just trying to make sure that we aren't in that situation.
Thank you.
We have a mortgage over the property. We would get our money back.
Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quite an echo, isn't it? Through you, Mr. Chair, to... Oh, you put them both on. Through you to Officer Ward. This is only a small point, but it's an important one. On page 22, 2.2, you say there that it's recommended that the council takes on the Nelson Building Society loan and requests the trust make repayments against that loan of 60,000 per annum. And the word is that loan, but actually in the recommendation it says quite clearly, confirms that it's expected the Nelson Historic Theatre Trust to repay the full loan amount total of 2.13, and so it goes on. So the trust is aware that they are now moving from just that loan of 632 to this larger one.
Yes, so apologies through the chair. The recommendation is the correct wording. The agreement is to make repayments against the entirety of the loan that is due to council, including any provision for that NBS loan as well, but it's not limited to just that NBS loan.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Councillor,
Can I follow up on that? Mr. Ward, through you, Mr. Chair, Officer Ward, what has changed? I mean, they have been struggling for almost a decade to meet their 40,000 interest payment to the Nelson Building Society, and now we're asking them to meet a 60,000 payment. Now, you do say, don't you, that they have a stable financial position? You confirmed that, didn't you? It's still the case, and they have small net surpluses. So what's changed that's enabled them to do that? I just don't want to feel that they may have been caught in a sea of debt, 2.1 million, and you float past on a life raft and say, well, I can get you out of this if you pay another 20,000 a year, when really they would perhaps deep down like to have said, no, we really would prefer to do nothing about this and just let it go as is. What's your position on that?
So thank you. Through the chair, the key issue here is not the 40,000 they've been repaying to the NBS. That has been manageable, but it has been at the expense of there not being any repayments to council on its loan. And so what we've sought to do through the negotiation with the Theatre Royal is come up with a solution that they feel is sustainable and affordable, but which also achieves our objective of actually getting our repayments against our loan. And I think my previous report, I went into further detail in relation to the grants the council gives to the Theatre Trust, and a significant portion of that going to the NBS on that loan repayment at terms which aren't as favourable as council can get for its borrowing. So really this is not so much about the affordability of the NBS portion of the role of the loan, it's about council receiving repayments against its loan to the trust.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick calculation, it's going to take them 40 years to pay it back.
So through the chair, between 35 and 40 years at that payment level, but what we've indicated is that we will review the agreement every 5 years, and if the trust is in a position to pay back quicker, it has committed to increasing the repayments on review.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. The first one, Mr. Ward, you referred to other community loans that we have. Could you just refresh the committee's memory on which other interest-free loans we have out?
So we've had one recently with the Rainbow Ski Field, which is has been repaid. We've previously had one with the Melrose Society, which again was repaid principal only. I'd need to check in terms of other ones.
I'm just trying to establish whether this is a consistent behaviour that we have of giving interest-free loans to community organisations, or if it's an unusual step that we would do that.
I'm not aware of any community organisation we've given a loan to and have charged interest on, but I'm happy to.
No, I'm more interested in the number of community organisations that we give loans to and don't charge interest. Whether it's something that we do as a matter of course, so it's seen as quite a normal practice. Because I'm not aware of very many of them.
They would all have to come through council, I would imagine. So the previous ones we have made to community organisations that have come through council have been on an interest-free basis.
All right, so we can think of Melrose and Rainbow.
Skifield.
Okay, I'm just asking those questions because of precedent, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't like this to be something that we're doing on a regular basis. I think there are some implications around that. And I guess the implication I want to understand a little bit better is what is the cost to ratepayers of the non-interest components? So can I get just an understanding of what it's costing? Obviously we give a grant to the Theatre Royal. Now if we give an interest-free loan, what is that interest component? Because essentially that's really an additional grant. Is that, I'm sorry if it's in the report and I've missed it.
So it's in the report on page 4 of my report, which is in the options table under option 1. The risks and disadvantages. There are some additional costs to rates, approximately 30,000 per annum in total interest costs.
So that's essentially in addition to the current grant, the annual grant that we give, and so that's another additional $30,000. So essentially it's an increase. Essentially this arrangement is while there is a repayment coming back, there's also an additional absorption of interest. All right, thank you. That's fine, thank you. And just a question for the Chief Financial Officer, just in relation to following up from Mr. Murray's question on capacity for council to carry debt. When you're looking at the headroom around debt, if you were to contemplate, obviously we've got some decisions that council's yet to make. If council was minded to make a contribution to the Waimea Dam, would you still consider that there is sufficient headroom?
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Ward.
All right, just through you, Mr. Chair, the other significant loan that we have provided interest-free is to the Tasman Bays Heritage Trust, the museum, both councils to that organisation.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Councillor McGo.
Quick question through you, Mr. Chair. What's the amount to the annual grant? What is the amount of the annual grant currently to the Theatre Royal?
It is in the previous report that was attached to which is 230,000.
Just entertaining another alternative is reducing the grant, the annual grant, and just writing it off as a grant to the council. The total grant will be, I think, $2.9 million. That's 1.3 plus the 800,000 we've already given them. Just saying that as a grant, and let them stand and fall on their own feet. Is that an alternative?
So just for clarity, so that I understand the question, are you suggesting that we write off the entire amount of the loan, both to ourselves and to the Nelson Building Society, and then reduce our operating grant in return?
do you think, Zita?
So my quick calculation, they would lose on that deal. I mean, the interest on $2.4 million loan is what, $120,000 a year, and so we write that off and take away their grant. That would be better for us than it would be for the Theatre Royal.
Councillor Courtney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following on from Councillor McGurk's point, I was wondering when reading through these reports, Officer Ward, why you didn't include option 4, page 35, which was in the original report back that you gave us, the very full report you gave us in January of last year. No, it wasn't. It was March of last year. And that's the option, converts the debt to a suspensory loan and writes it off over a period of time. Why didn't you include that in this latest report, that option 4?
Through the chair, we have canvassed options through workshops. What I sought to brought back was what I felt was were the key options that were liable to be acceptable to council. I guess there is a point of principle in relation to an organisation that enters into a loan agreement with council, and then I believe the expectation should be that that organisation does then make its loan repayments, regardless of how long that might take. But there does seem to be it doesn't set a particularly helpful precedent, I don't believe, where we enter into a loan agreement with an organisation and then somewhere down the line decide to write that off. It doesn't seem a very transparent process to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, something is niggling at me though, and it's on page 24. It's the comparison of grant funding that very wisely the committee asked for. And you look there at the suitor at 6 million from the council, a grant, and then the 6 million from the other grants and fundraising, and Nelson School of Music 3.15 million and 3.4 from us, 3.15 from us. Other grants and fundraising 3.4 million. When it comes to the Theatre Royal and their major refurbishment back in, what was it, 2011? 10? 9. We contribute 805,000. Now, other grants and fundraising is sort of 3.675 million. And I just, it looks out of step. It looks as though it doesn't look to be equity there, and I'm just wondering how you feel about that. Have we sort of set them up way back then to fail in a sense? What's your view on that?
So through the chair, with the benefit of hindsight, things may have been done differently at the time, but it was one of the first off the blocks in terms of major redevelopments of our cultural facilities. But I think the project controls from day one were not as tight as they would be nowadays. And when the trust first approached the council, I think the scope and the scale of the project was maybe smaller than it ended up being. So I think it's a case where, and we certainly as a council have learnt from that, and the suitor, we ensured the money was available up front, and we understood the scope of the project, and that project indeed just came in slightly under budget over that project because of improved project management. Those project management skills probably weren't in place for that redevelopment, and when the council first signed up to it, it was maybe only a $2 million project that was presented to them, and so at that time it seemed reasonable that between the two councils, Tasman District and Nelson City, they provided 50% of that $2 million figure when the project began. As the project increased, the costs seemed to get away on the project management, but and that's why the council has come to the aid of the Theatre Royal, but it was on the condition that it would be a loan and that loan should be repaid in the future.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. But peppered through your report in January, it said, and it's not possibly your words, it's picked up from other years, where it says that there's no chance at all of them ever repaying the 1.5 million. And I just wonder whether today, with this recommendation before us, that we've been asked by the Government's Committee to look at very thoroughly, whether we're just moving the chairs on the deck and not really achieving anything much at all in what's there now.
So I don't recall using those words either in the report or verbally to the committee. What I would say is that I've spent some considerable time with the chairman of the trust coming up with a proposal which the trust believes is sustainable, which meets the council's objectives in terms of a loan repayment, and which also makes most efficient use of the council grant that goes into that organisation. So both council staff and the theatre trust believe that this is a sustainable and viable proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. I've got Mayor Rees, followed by Councillor Dahlberg next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd actually like to move the recommendation and the recommendation to council, if you're happy to take that now, so we can, maybe more questions, but at least gives us a platform for debate. So I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Dahlberg.
I'm happy to reserve right to speak to that if you've got further questions and come back to speaking to it.
Thank you. That's understood. So just to clarify, you're moving both that the report be received and the recommendations to council? Thank you. Mover and a seconder for that. So before I put it to the vote, is there any further discussion on that? Councillor Dahlberg.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just had one question that was sort of just bothering me. We've got a building that's in 2009, and we're saying the loan repayment, so we're 10 years into it, over 35 years going forward. So I'm sort of seeing upgrade, I'm seeing serious maintenance well before that term finishes. So my concern really probably is if we say 15 years away, they've got a major fundraising exercise again, or funding out of their present business proposal. Has that been taken into account? I know there was a mention before about the next year or two's maintenance, and can we just clarify that actually is feasible, or are we just setting them up for 15, 20 years' time struggling?
Mr. Ward.
So the trust have provided me with a maintenance schedule covering the next 15 years. So for the significant assets that they have, they know will need renewal within that period, and they have costed those out and have assured me that they have made provision within their forecasts for providing that maintenance, providing the funding for that maintenance schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. I have a question from Councillor Barker before I ask the proposers to close. Councillor Barker.
Well, actually, I'm speaking to the motion, Mr. Chairman, which I support. We've been in a situation which has stagnated, and it has been concerning, and it has been worthwhile to go through the process that we did do with the workshops. I believe that I have a lot more confidence now in getting to a situation where we see some finality which is acceptable to the ratepayers, and this is a solution. Given the feedback that we got at the workshops, I believe that I can think that this is the best way that we have in front of us to conclude this and ensure that the commitments made in the past, even if they're taking an awful long time to be met, are going to be met. So I'm in favour.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Just one more from Councillor Dahlberg.
This time speaking in favour of the motion. Again, it's a community group. It's highly used. We get all year round activity out of an area, and it's winter is the one we're concerned about. It's in the CBD. It hits all the bits. We can go back over the historic, but we're trying not to. I think moving us forward, this is a workable plan. and I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dalberg. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take this as my either right or reply, assuming there are no further speakers. And I want to say I think this is a very thorough report, and I want to thank the staff for the time that they've taken to bring a proposal back to us and the work that they've done with the trust. I'm encouraged by the Chair's letter that's attached to our report, and have found the Chair a very positive person to work with, very realistic about the finances, and I have confidence in what he's stating there in terms of the letter. In terms of the options in front of us, and I take on board the question from Councillor Courtney and the table in relation to the previous funding. And I do think it's important to understand the context here. Essentially, if we look at this, the government contributed 44% of the final cost of this building. And I'd like to say that might be attributed to other grants and other funding. But I would say, if we look back in history, achieving prime ministerial support for $2.9 million depended quite heavily on the Mayor of the day meeting directly with the Prime Minister to advocate for this cause. So I think that you can look at that and say, well, actually, but for the support of Nelson City Council and but for the advocacy of the Mayor of the day, that money would have been quite difficult to secure. If I look at the mix of the total cost, we can look at, that means 44% of the total cost was met by a prime ministerial grant. If we take on the position that it's proposed here, another 44% will be being met by Nelson City Council. Paid off over time in terms of the loan over a period of time, but not all of it, so it'll bring it down. Another 2.9% of the final cost was met by Tasman District Council, and another 3.9% of the final cost was met by the Rata Foundation, which I think, if my maths are correct, means 94.8% of the final cost of the Theatre Royal was met by public bodies that grant. The remainder was fundraising. And actually, I think that is a significant contribution from government, from local government, from both Tasman District, Nelson City, and from organisations like the Rata Foundation. We are contributing every year, and I think it is right, and the principle that Mr Ward came back with in this report was that loans will be repaid. That if you enter into a loan with Nelson City Council, you should do so on the basis that the loan will be repaid. And we will work with you, if we need to, around interest arrangements. And sometimes we have to wait for those loans to be repaid. But just as Tasman Bay's Heritage Trust is repaying its loan, so it is important that the Theatre Royal does as well. In time, in the process of doing that, this council, in the last term, very generously doubled the operating grants to the Theatre Royal. So every year, we are contributing over $250,000 direct rates contribution to support the community, what is a wonderful community organisation and a trust that brings events to Nelson. And I think that is a very fair and generous contribution to one organisation. So I'm happy to support this. I think the principles are being met, that if you ask for a loan and you come to ask for a loan from council, you will need to repay it. We recognise the community value of the Theatre Royal, and so therefore we're willing to absorb the interest cost. I also think that the arrangement here is just financially prudent in the sense that we can arrange a better loan. We have a better loan arrangement available just because of our ability to access money than continuing with the Nelson Building Society loan. So I'm happy to support this going up to council. As you know, it's very rare for me to move a recommendation that's going up to council, but I'm conscious that that is where it will end, and that it's a matter that has been around since I first became a councillor many moons ago. I was privy to some of the discussions that occurred when the loan was entered into, and as you know, it has been something that I have been desirous of resolving back to a principal position I think we've got here today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we've been proposed and seconded. We've had the discussion, the debate. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. I just wanted to say that I'm delighted to see this as well. It's been around certainly as long as I've been, which is not as long as you, Madam Mayor, and also express my appreciation for the work that's been done. I know it's been a lot of work, Chris, so thank you. Move on then to item 9, the Audit New Zealand letter, and as I mentioned, we'll go straight to item 11 after that. So welcome Bede Kearney and Jacques Coetzee to the table, and hand over to you, if that's okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We've got the report from the Tutu Council on the results of our 2017 audit. I'll take the report as read, so I won't go through it in detail. As the Chairman referred earlier, there is another letter that we issue to management. That tends to be the more routine matters that we've come across, so that we can focus this particular report on matters that we think are relevant for the Council's attention. The things I'd just like to briefly touch on, probably first and most importantly, our audit opinion. We issued an unmodified audit opinion on the financial and non-financial information in the annual report, so that was a pleasing result all round. Yeah, thanks to my staff and to the council officers that assisted on the way through our audit process. There are a number of business risks that we've identified. A number of those were reported there because they were identified in our planning document, and the results of those, you can see we've just acknowledged that we've agreed with the treatment or received the information that we required on the way through. Just one matter to draw your attention to in item 4.4, where we're talking about the quality of asset management information, or more the knowledge of the assets themselves and the asset condition. That's something that we will be looking at more closely, or looking to rely on more closely as part of our long-term plan audit. I suppose the point I'd make there is that in general we're expecting councils to be improving on an ongoing basis the knowledge of their assets, and so that's a matter I leave for council to look at. But in general, it's fair to say you'll always like to know more about the condition of your assets, because that's where the planning comes from, how they're performing and when they need to be replaced. Very important part of the planning process. That's probably the main recommendation that I would refer to in there. There's also just an acknowledgement on page 48 of just around the financial, the preparation process. It wasn't as smooth last year in terms of the final audit process on the ground. We'll sit down as part of our planning and work through with management and make sure we get it back to where it needs to be. And that's about us being clear and specific about the information that will help us do our work, and agreeing timetables for delivery of that. So we've got a really good working relationship, so we'll be able to take our way through that as part of the 2018 audit. So happy to take any comments, but as I think we've previously advised, Jacques and I have sort of job shared on this audit, and we'll continue to do that through the 2018-28 LTP audit, and then I'll have disappeared and Jacques will be taking you through. So I guess one of the next meetings will be to talk about the planning documentation for the 2018 annual audit, and Jacques will, when we've provided that, Jacques will take the committee through that.
Thank you, Mr. Kearney. So open up to committee questions to Mr. Kearney in relation to the 2017 audit. No members? Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a small point, but I think another important one. Through you, you mentioned here in the introduction we have provided a separate letter to management setting out our more detailed findings on the audit processes, internal controls and our accounting issues. And I was just wondering, is it worth, do you think it's appropriate that our chair receive a copy of that letter that goes to management? if it has that sort of detail in it?
Perhaps I can comment on that as I introduced in my chair's report, Councillor Courtney. I do see that document, and I go through it with the Group Manager of Corporate Services. I have done so on this occasion as well, and I'm satisfied with that letter.
So that's in its entirety. It's not a précis of the letter,
No, it's the entire letter. It's the entire letter. Mr. Murray.
Through the chair, just a couple of questions and matters arising from the letter, but I just want to start here. If I'm hearing you right, this might be the last time that we see you in Nelson, and if that's the case, and that was very carefully slipped in there, personally, and I think on behalf of the committee and the council, we'd just like to thank you for your input over the many years into the council operations. There's certainly been a long history there of Bede Kearney signing the audit opinion, and certainly your work here has been valued, so thank you very much. So I just wanted to start there because you slipped that in very quickly. Just on the letter itself, and just to follow up from Councillor Courtney's question, and it's perhaps not a question to you, but one to management, in that the matters that were raised in that separate letter are contained in attachment 1 in précis. And really when I read through that, it actually, to me, sort of only portrayed one side of the story, because the very next question I had is well, what are we doing about those things, and how are we going to progress these matters, because some of them are actually quite important. So as a committee member, I'm sitting here looking at a particular item in here and going, oh yep, there's something we need to address. How are we addressing it? So I think there needs to be something somewhere in these reports which doesn't leave that question hanging for the committee. Albeit I appreciate, Mr. Peters, you've seen the report, but I'd like to know, particularly around some of these matters, that they are being progressed, other than, yeah, we'll have a look at it and do something before the 2017-18 audit. So my request is that we get a bit more information about these items in Appendix 1 at the committee to say, yep, they are being attended to, and this is how. That would be valuable to me. I just want to come back to two other items in the report itself, and this is, I'll start with the asset management plan item 4.4, and you've touched on the fact that there's been no work done on the assets in the knowledge base, and again, when I read that I was a bit concerned about that. Obviously the auditor is a bit concerned about that. It's an item that appears in the work list, and I'd like to know what we're doing about that. Specifically, because I don't think that can be left on the table. It's a bit of a surprise, and it shouldn't be, and it comes through in the LTP letter of engagement as well, and we need to know what we're doing to address that point at a minimum. And then finally, a question through the chair to Ms Harrison there. I note there up above in 4.2 around the regional landfill, and there's an interesting wording from the auditor here. It talks about the 4.2 million transferred from TDC, and it says at which point a consideration of 4.2 was transferred from TDC. What does that mean? Does that mean we received cash, or does that mean consideration in another form, or what, how did we get that 4.2? And so that's a question, but that's all I've got. Thank you for your report, and I'm pleased we've met our statutory requirements, and we got an unmodified audit opinion, and that's what we needed to do, but a couple of things arising.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Just in relation to your, well, several points actually. First of all, thank you for stealing my thunder and thanking Mr. Kearney for his service. I was going to do that at the close, but certainly echo that bid while it's topical. So thank you again for that. Mr. Murray, in relation to confirmation that the matters raised in the supplementary letter are being addressed, just note on page 43, the last paragraph of the group manager's letter, covering letter to the report, which says the chief executive accepts these comments and will address the matters prior to the annual report. I think we can rest assured that they're in the hands of the chief executive, who's taken ownership of those. In relation to the last question, I ask you to answer that directly regarding this.
So through the chair, the question around the joint landfill, it was actually cash that was transferred from TDC.
Sorry, yeah.
So this is something I have talked with some of the councillors about, is the state of the asset management plan. Some are very good, and some, I think the phrase that was used was not yet mature. And yes, there is more work to be done there in terms of understanding our assets, and that's not a one-year fix. That's something that there will be a focus over the next 2 or 3 years, but realistically, to get them all up to the standard of the infrastructure plans could take 6 years. There's a lot of work there in terms of capturing the data, having the right software to hold the data, and then the right staff to do the work. And I think one of the priorities the Mayor has talked about is lifting council performance, and that's one of the areas that will be a focus, and I suspect will be a measure for me in my KPIs over the next 2 or 3 years. I just have that gut feeling. So, yeah.
And just one final comment. Again, vaguely covered in the report, and also the LTP thing is adhering to timetables when we're going through these year-end processes. And I sort of get the sense that that was a little bit stressed in this process going in, not that it's overtly in here about that, but I think that if that is an issue, we need to be focused on making sure that when we come through the process next year, that we do meet timetables for the auditors. And if indeed the bit that was outside of the timetable from memory last year, which wasn't in there, was that if there is slippage in the timetable and it's becoming an issue, that there's some sort of escalation of that to some oversight, so that we do hit our commitments in terms of the timetable. So again, it's not it's a bit of a theme. It's here and it's in the long-term plan and thing, and I think we need to make sure that we're hitting our commitments.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Councillor Delberg, I think you had a question earlier.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Murray's picked up when I was interested in the asset management plan. And following on the debenture trust deed, that'll get an audit. Is there some sort of timeline for this? I'd be interested in that.
The work that we do is out of an agreement between the trustee and the council, so there's no statutory deadline, there's no statutory requirement. It's part of your borrowing arrangements through the local government agency. You have a trustee and a debenture as part of those arrangements. There are timeframes specified in there. I think one of them's, I think we're meant to issue our report within 5 days. That never happens. It's not doable. So we report when we're in the position to have done the work that we need to do. And you know, I guess we're a third party to this arrangement, and so we weren't consulted as to the timeframes that were in there. But the work has been done, and our report to the trustee has been issued.
So just to follow up, the other one here on page 6 of your report, contracted service for Nelson Regional Sewerage Business Unit. See, there's council and other relevant parties should sign the shared service agreement. So I'm assuming you got an agreement that it hasn't been signed, or was that like because we're still negotiating, or just a forgotten oversight?
Through the chair, that's in the process of being signed at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question to the Chief Executive or his team, and it's in relation to page 48, third from the bottom of the table, the water charge data management system. During the LTP process, we decided not to proceed with electronic water meters. I'm wondering whether that decision will have any effect on whether this investigation will be able to actually produce a better report on how our water is being used or lost or whatever.
Through the chair, the comment really relates more to the limitations of the accounting software. It doesn't have any relationship to the decision around electronic versus manual meters.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Any further questions? If not, I'll ask that we put the motion that the Audit, Risk and Finance Subcommittee receives the report. I don't think this goes through to Council. Have a mover for that. Councillor Barker, thank you. Seconded. Mr. Murray, thank you. Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll move to item 11, page 75, the audit engagement letter for the long-term plan. Back to you, Ed.
Big pardon. Again, I'll take it as read. The key things that to note in this is that actually we issue 2 audit reports as part of this, I guess, audit. One, we issue an audit report on your consultation document before it goes out to consultation, and again an audit report on the long-term plan before council adopts it, which is required to be by the end of June. Just in relation to that, there is no statutory time frame, just referring to Councillor Dalberg's question earlier, for the consultation document, but there is a 30 June requirement to adopt your annual report, your long-term plan. To be brutally frank, most of this letter is a template. This is the letter that all councils get. At the time we're issuing this, we're not aware of the particular areas of emphasis, the consultation issues that you will have as part of it, so that it does not get customised to any great degree, other than around the timetable, which is on page 87, the fee, and I guess our respective names that change. So it is very much a template document. But just going back to some of the things we talked about with the annual report, that whole relationship and delivery of expectations is critical, and we've been quite detailed in the report, in the letter itself, as to the key timetable and timeframes in there. The reason we're being so specific is that well, for council, this is a long-term plan. It's a big issue. We've got 62 long-term plans to audit, so it's a huge strain on our organisation, and that means we've got very little flexibility and ability to deal with slippage. So that's why the document reads like this. I'm not signalling any issues that are on the table in terms of concerns, just explaining why the document is the way it is. But we'll work closely with management and liaise closely with them. Just picking up the earlier point, if any issues arise, I guess we will look to the escalation of those issues earlier rather than later, because I guess one of the risks from my point of view is that I'm unable to sign by the 30th of June. I don't want to surprise the council if we got to that situation. And look, I'm talking generically here. I'm not identifying any issues that are on the table. So happy to take any questions.
Questions? Mr. Murray?
Thank you again through the chair. Page 93. I had to have a wee smile here, heading health and safety of audit staff. And I'll just, if I can indulge the committee, I just reminisced a little bit on my early days of auditing, where the powers sent me to Central Otago, Alexandra, to audit the Justice Department there, and I went into the courts in the midwinter, and they stuck me in the cell with a light, and it was -3, auditing the court in Cromwell and Alexandra. So I was quite heartened to see that you expect us to look after your people in terms of normal health and safety practices, which is very, very nice to see. But look, I'd remind Audit New Zealand that actually we have very high health and safety standards here, and we expect your staff to comply with our standards, was my comment that came out of that. You'll see in the papers here that that we are hot on health and safety, and it's a two-way street here. So I see you're saying you want us to look after you. We need you to look after us as well in that space, and I just wanted to make that comment.
Excellent point. And look, as part of that, if our staff need to be briefed on any expectations, I'd ask that that be done when they come on site. Totally agree.
Great. And just one thing I couldn't get the context on was the fee. There's 86 plus just in disbursements. What was it last year or last time round? just for comparative purposes?
The Office of the Auditor General managed that process very closely. I think there's about a 5% increase on last time, and that's across the board.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Any other questions? Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, on page 84, there is the list of expected significant assumptions for Nelson City Council. And in that, I'm very heartened to see that climate change is one of those assumptions. How are you finding that's playing out across the country in terms of councils determining what their assumption should be? Given we're waiting, we've got an interaction with Ministry for the Environment around a fairly significant assumption.
It varies, but probably the big story is we'll know more in a few years would be the big story from around the country. But councils are making some assumptions around that where they believe they have enough information to start taking action. So I guess low-lying areas subject to sea level change, others longer term weather patterns, and so in the agricultural area things might change, much more difficult and not necessarily seeing a lot at this stage. So councils are taking the first steps. They're certainly taking, from my observation, taking it seriously, but similar to the asset information we talked about, needing to know more is the key to be able to make really good long-term decisions.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, also be just in relation to NZTA and their timing. Obviously we've got some different timing from what we would have had previously with draft GPS. So we've had to make some assumptions in our long-term plan that the funding as proposed in the Regional Land Transport Plan, which we are about to hear submissions on, will be confirmed and moved through. And I just want to, if there was anything where you were saying, no, that's completely not the way to approach it, we'd probably want to know today.
Best information at the time is all you can really work with the assumptions. So there are councils that are changing, consulting on changing policies. Well, they have to consult with an open mind, so it's not certain that they will change. But our recommendation is that you prepare your LTP on the basis that the policy will change, because that's the package that you are putting forward. So the assumptions are not certain, and so all we're looking to, when you do make these assumptions, that they're supportable, you have something to support them, and it's the best information. So, for example, if NZTA had made a different set of decisions to your assumptions, we would have a problem. If you're still working through the process, no problem.
If may I please add, the only comment that I will add to that is just because of the timing difference and that being unique to previous periods, is to make that just clear in the consultation document, to make all that information available to the readers and the users, absolutely acceptable.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Madam. Are there any further questions? I take from your comments earlier about timing, I had some questions around timing that I think you've mostly addressed, but given the fact that this timing schedule has some already completed dates, I'm just noting and echoing your view that you have no concerns at this stage where we're up to speed with where we should be for you to proceed at this point. Thank you. If there's no further questions, could I ask that we have a mover for the recommendation that the Audit Committee receives the report, noting that there will be no there's no feedback from this meeting that will change it, and therefore in doing this we're also authorising the Mayor, or approving the Mayor. They have no ability to authorise anything, but noting that this means the Mayor will sign the letter in its current form. So would somebody move that? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Dahlberg, thank you. Is there any further discussion? Ms. Goodsey?
If I may add, in conjunction with the LTP process, we've also kicked off the planning process for the 2018 audit. We will also be meeting with most key management personnel over the next couple of days to, again, the same process, ensure that we are considering the right timeframes and timelines to conduct the 2018 audit, to ensure that there's similar instances that do not repeat themselves, and to make better use of time of both our staff and council staff, and to ensure that it's a smoother, efficient audit.
Good to know, thank you. Any further comments or discussions? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Bede. Thank you, Jacques. And once again, thank you, Bede, for many years. And hopefully next time we see you up here, it'll be on a more leisurely basis, enjoying Nelson for what it is, rather than having to come and work here. Thank you. Okay, we move back to item 10, the tendering process. This again is an item that has been before us in various forms, and this is a follow-up that was requested from the previous meeting. Once again, I'd like to see if this is a situation where we limit any sort of relitigation of the issues and look to see really whether the concerns that were raised during the events that led to this stage and the completion of these reports has reached the point where we want it to be. So with that, I'll open the, I don't think there's anything really to add to the report, but Nikki, do you want to, I know from our discussion there didn't seem to be anything further, so I'll open it for discussion to the committee for discussion. Speak. Mr. Murray.
Thank you, through the chair. Look, the recommendation that come from the committee referred to that the full scope report will be agreed of the Chair of Governance and Mr. Peters. At the time, I stepped into that gap because Mr. Peters was overseas and I think Mr. Barker was down south. And in discussions with Mr. Hammond at the time, we went back to Crowhorth to ask them to vary their report in two ways. One, to put a front end on it which says this is the problem. The report, the initial report addressed the solution, so to speak, and had a number of recommendations. But the second bit of the report that we're looking for, following on from what's the problem, they had the solution, was a wee conclusion that if you implemented our solution, then the issues would be resolved inside the council building. So that was phase one of the discussion, and this is the report that's come back on that basis. And I believe that one, it answers those two questions as well as we can. So for my mind, the Crowhorth report is now complete, and we have identified what the problem is. We've got the solution, and if we implement that, that has been done. And in this report, there's further work done by council staff to say, yes, we have implemented those within this building. So for mine, I've got a tick next to that box. The second bit of the request from the committee was around having a session with councillors, elected members, so that they could understand their obligations under the Members' Interest Act in relation to this particular piece. And I can recall attending that session with Jonathan Salter. It was a very, very good session in my view, and critical question around whose responsibility is it for managing members' interests, where does it actually sit, and while there's a responsibility with council management, there is also a bigger responsibility with elected members themselves. And we've seen some dramatic change in the interest register and how that's recorded as a result of that session, and I think a clearer understanding of our obligation around this table to make sure that we are compliant with this piece of legislation. So look, I was happy to move the resolution because I think the matter's now closed. The bits of work that we asked to be done around this has been done, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, I think we've got everything in place now to make sure we don't fall into this gap again. So that's why I've moved it. So I'm happy to support this recommendation and call the matter closed.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. We have a proposer. I'll see if we've got a seconder, and then I'll open it for further debate before I put it to the vote. So do I have a seconder for the motion? Thank you, Councillor Dahlberg. I'll therefore open it for further discussion. if there is any. Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to say I'm very pleased to see this report and the steps that have been taken and the progress that has been made. It was essential that progress was made. As you know, I was very concerned about the letter that I received from the Office of the Auditor General, so I'm pleased that the steps have been taken. There is a comment here around, and Mr. Murray noted as well, the training undertaken by Mr. Jonathan Salter. My recollection is not all councillors attended that workshop, and I would request that every effort is made to get the councillors in who did not attend that workshop. It's one of those, I have no ability to compel members to attend things as mayor. I can try my best endeavours, and we can send reminder after reminder. But actually, this is one where, in terms of good governance practice, a failure to have heard the information, absorbed it, and asked questions and understood it is going to leave us with potentially with elected members who are still vulnerable to this scenario, despite the best endeavours of staff. So, if perhaps the appropriate officer could follow up and make sure that those elected members are given every opportunity to come in for a one-on-one to go over the information from Jonathan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That touches on something I was going to suggest at the close of the discussion, and that is whether it is possible to have that information that was presented by Jonathan Salter or something similar available in some form of handbook or guide, so that there is absolutely, putting it bluntly, no excuse for anybody not to have seen the material. And perhaps while officers concerned are looking at the possibility of repeating the workshop, they might also look at the possibility of producing a written guide which is made available not only to current but future councillors as well.
And through the chair, we will certainly, I've got it down to get people in for one-on-one, but it's certainly something that with the new legal panel that we've just recruited, they will offer us quite a lot of training as part of that package, and we do want to set up a regular ongoing training sort of program that we can get a variety of people in to cover the same issues.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Goldberg.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, again, two things. One is, does this report, because it came from the Governance Committee, does it go back to them, or do we go straight to the council?
So through the chair, the reason it went to the Governance Committee was at that point in time the Audit, Risk and Finance Subcommittee did not exist. So in terms of the recommendations that are here, they stay here, and they're not a recommendation, and it won't go back to Governance.
Thank you. And the second comment really is, again, very pleased this is in the public area, and that report now is transparent. I think that's kind of exactly really where we want it to be after we've done the investigations and reports behind the scenes. I'm very pleased that we were actually fronting these things.
Thank you. Madam Mayor.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to perhaps just correct a comment made by the GM Corporate Services. The Audit, Risk and Finance Committee, I do believe, did exist. I think it was established very early. It just didn't have all the necessary mechanisms to get underway. It might be a very fine point, but I just wouldn't want the public to think that in forming up the committee structure at the start of the term, I didn't turn my mind to an Audit, Risk and Finance Committee.
Thank you for that clarification, Madam. Any further comments? Any further discussion? If not, Councillor Goldberg.
Can I just pick up that point, because I'm in the Governance Committee as well. So that assignment for us initially passed down to this committee. Do we somehow or other go back to the Governance Committee and say that this report solves their concern, or do they not have a concern now because they passed it on to this committee?
It was my understanding at the time, and I'm happy to take guidance from the chair of the Governance Committee, that once the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee was fully operational. This was passed across to us, to this committee, to handle at this committee.
And that's my understanding. And the reality is that under the delegation manual, the powers and the controls of the committees are set. And this is a decision of the council made under delegation. So regardless of which, it doesn't need to go back to the governance committee. It is now a decision of council.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion or comment on that, I'll put the motion. It has been proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We move now to item 12. Page 104 is the corporate report. And I'll hand to the Group Manager Corporate Services. No, you're doing it, are you, Tracy?
So through the chair, I'll take the report as read and answer any questions. So this is the report for the 6 months ending 31st of December 2017, and the current surplus is 3.3 million favourable to the budget, which is the phased budget. I also highlight in the attachments that in terms of the capital graph, it's been amended this time to include the forecast capital expenditure program for this year, which has been formed up as part of the long-term plan workshops in terms of what we're going to deliver this current financial year, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Just before I open it up to the committee, just picking up on that last point, can I ask then how on the dashboard, page 106, it refers still to the operating budget, capital budget of 61.8 million. Will that reflect that against a revised forecast figure, or will we continue to reflect that against a budget of 61.8?
Through the chair, I would prefer to report that back against the original budget, because that is how our annual reporting will report back against. I've used reporting numerous times in that sentence. But obviously the forecast is there to provide you, more up-to-date information of where the program is likely to end up.
Thank you. I think it's probably appropriate from I was wondering to ensure that we had continued to report against an original budget, which I think is important. Mr. Murray.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just had a question related to that matter around the capital forecast. The question was around, is there any formal authorisation or approval required for a revised forecast in the capital? I can understand where it's come from, how we got there, but is there sort of some resolution required somewhere by a committee to say this is now the new forecast? That's question one. I had just another very quick question, I'll just throw it in there now, and Ms. Harrison may not be able to answer this, but in our operating expenditure, we've got an over budget because of all of the activity in the forestry, so it's showing up as a higher expense. But my understanding is also commensurate with that is that we're really blowing some revenue budgets out of the water favourably, I might add, but I couldn't see any reference to that in the revenue, so I sort of had one side I thought expected to see but not the other, so I just wondered what happened to the other, or are we too early to actually see that revenue hitting our P&Ls, so to speak. So that was my two questions. Do we need some sort of formal approval for the revised capital program, and what's happened to my forestry income?
Thank you. Will you answer that? Will you first?
So with the capital budgets, no, you don't need to resolve to reduce the target. We're just simply telling you now the forecast will be near $40 million, and that's based on as well as how the council are going this year, but also we look back over the last 5 years. And the best we've managed over the last 5 years is $40 million capex, with an average of $35 million, which is why when we're doing the the long-term budgets for next year, for the next 10 years, we're saying don't aim to spend more than $40 million in a year because we just can't. In fact, $40 million will still be a stretch target. So I think what you're hearing is that the planning assumption for the LTP is that we'll spend $40 million this year, which will still be one of the best years on record. We'll have to carry forward some $20 million, and that's the basis on which we're doing our planning. But later in the year, you will get a report which provides recommendations on carry forwards from this year into next year's budget, and that's when the council confirms what is allowed to carry forward, and that's the normal process. So no, you don't. The answer is no. You don't need to resolve that there is less a target. I mean, as far as we're concerned, the staff are still trying. We just know they aren't going to get there. It hasn't been that all of a sudden some projects are off the list. We just know that we won't get there.
Yeah, thanks for that. I suppose my reason for raising it was if we start at the beginning of the process, we've sat around the table and gone, oh, yep, we're going to do this project and we're going to try and do this within 12 months or whatever it is, and it's going to cost us X. And everyone here's agreed to that. And now through the process, as far as I can see, there's been some sort of reconsideration of that in management, and I get that totally, and I'm not, that should and is appropriate. But yet, the bit that comes back to the committee and says, well, we're now no longer going to do that within 12 months, or we're not going to do it at all, or whatever the decision is around that particular project, hasn't gone back to those original sort of like thinkers around that to actually go, oh, yep, that's what's actually happening in that space. So I get the whole premise and why we're doing it and all the rest of it. I just sort of am a wee bit confused about, you know, which of the $63 million we're going to do, we're not going to do anymore, and the reasons for that. And I suppose I've got a question as to how that prioritisation actually did happen, and whether I'd be happy that my well, I shouldn't say that, but my street getting resealed or whatever it is isn't going to get done anymore. or my sewage system out by my place at Quarter Park or whatever it is.
So the prioritisation wasn't as elegant as that. It was, so tell us which projects you just aren't going to get done this year because we don't have the resource consent, we don't have the easement, we don't have the design. In some cases, we don't even know where it's going to be built. There are projects that even if you gave me another 20 staff, still wouldn't get done this year because there's still more groundwork to do. Those numbers shouldn't have been in this year's capital budget, and there should have been a conversation this time last year saying we just can't spend a $40 million budget and absorb a $20 million carry forward. But that's the conversation this year. So no, there wasn't any strategic decision about, ooh, we'll leave that one out. It was, okay, tell us the ones that you think, even with the best will in the world, aren't going to get done. And so that's the conversation the councils have been faced with as well for the LTP, is we've now had to start pushing projects further out, and there have been questions, well, I want that one done sooner. Well, again, unfortunately, you haven't told us what you want us to build, and we don't have a resource consent, and we don't own all the land, so we're planning it for year 3. And so that's been the logic about prioritisation. It's been very much on a risk-based approach, not about anyone's personal favourites.
Okay, so that's great. That's a fabulous process. But I suppose I'm still sitting here going, I wonder what these projects are that we don't have resource consents for, or we're just not going to get done. You know, what are they and how much was they? And when I'm looking at the capital bit of this report, which ones I'm not expecting to see done because of these very issues. It's sort of like a bit of a hole for me to understand what this $20 or $30 million or $40 million actually is in real terms. Now, I get the rationale, I get the reasons, I get everything that goes in there, just not clear, and maybe that's just because I turn up to this committee, but I'm just not clear on what those projects are that are essentially going to be deferred or not done. But, you know, 12 months ago or even 6 months ago, I was expecting them to be done. It's just a communication thing is what I'm sort of looking for. And I don't know, perhaps I'm just not in the mix enough to know what they are, and that's been circulated elsewhere. That could well be the answer.
So I suspect, I suspect that that's exactly the situation, that the councillors have been working through this for 3 days last week with an estimates book looking at what was being carried, we expect to carry forward and what the budgets will be. So perhaps if we give you a copy of that, that estimates book might be the easiest way, and then if you've got any questions, you can sit down with one of our staff. Might be the easiest way of getting you up to speed with that. Because if we had to write a report on it, it would be massive. It truly would.
Okay, well, I don't need I'm just trying to make sure that it's been communicated as to what this is and it's been through the right channels. That's all I'm looking for. I don't have a particular interest in any one project per se, so as long as the process has been right to arrive at what we're not doing and we're satisfied here, well, I don't know how we can be satisfied here, but council is satisfied that the appropriate process has been through, then I'm okay with that.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I think these are very good questions from Mr. Murray, and from my perspective, it is important that you are satisfied. I fail to understand how the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee is going to be able to discharge its responsibility if there is not continuity, and we've discussed this before, continuity between the corporate report, and particularly this issue around the capital program coming to the Audit Risk Committee, the interrogation, the questioning goes on, the assurances are given, and then somewhere between the last set of assurances and where we've got to, you have a completely different capital program. And I guess that leaves you in a vulnerable position because you're here for the purposes of actually testing that and being able to give, to support the council and getting to an outcome that is, we do what we say we're going to do. So I think in terms of this, I saw this report come forward. I think there is a piece missing in terms of our reporting. When we come through the annual plan, long-term plan preparation stage, I think there needs to be a round back to the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee so that the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee can follow what has happened. And for those of you who, we've sat through previous meetings exactly on this capital program, 60 million, yes, it can be delivered, yes, it will be fine, it'll be a phasing issue. The reality is it can't, and for the reasons that, many of the reasons that Mr. Doherty has said today, they're just simple, practical reasons that we don't have the right to go onto land. We don't have a resource consent. There are issues around the pressure on the tendering, which we'll come to later in the agenda, around the market in terms of tender prices that are coming in that are affecting things. But I do think, I suppose, and I'll just refer this back to the Chief Executive and the Group Manager, there is, I think, a piece missing here so that this committee can follow the logic along the way and ensure that it is discharging its responsibilities. It isn't clear off this report as to why we've got such a change and what principles have been used and what the reasons were. And unless we know as this committee what the reasons are, then we won't be able to test over the next 12 months as to whether the reasons that were established last time are all of the reasons and actually the corrective actions happened, or whether we're going to have a repeat. So I'll leave that with you to contemplate.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I mean, I sit here not wanting to create additional work for officers because I appreciate there's a lot of pressure in that space, but it is a question of how we do fill that gap in a way that does give us just sufficient information to know and understand how we can discharge our duties on an ongoing basis in that area of capital. So perhaps it's something we can talk about in due course as to how we can achieve that simply, if that's possible. Thank you. Sorry, we've just got one response coming from the Group Manager, and then I'll take a question from Councillor Dahlberg.
So through the Chair, just closing off Mr. Murray's question around forestry income, I'd like to highlight on page 107 that the forestry income isn't missing, and it's under the fees and charges. Forestry income is 1.6 million more than budget.
Thank you. Councillor Dahlberg, I'll take your question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm in agreement with everyone else about the capital. I'm quite comfortable with the explanation, and I'm pleased that we've finally arrived at a workable, so I say, amount of capital that we can handle. The question I really want to ask is also covering up on page 108, which we say the school and music 430,000 unfavourable, and where the Nelson City Council is acting as banker. Are we sort of is that sort of how we deal with things, or are we doing the right thing there? Appreciate why we're doing it, just making sure that we've actually got the right process, that we're not, shall I say, doing something, that we haven't not got sign off for.
Thank you. Councillor Dolberg, do you want to do it or?
So through the chair, I mean, it's similar to how we ran the Suter project, where we're because we've got the systems and processes around signing off contract payments and things like that we sort of, for continuity, we continue to pay and get reimbursed within the month. Well, this one wasn't within the month from the other party, so it's similar to what we've run before.
Do we back up question that I appreciate that answer, but I'm not comfortable with it. Because I think I do know that the city we had a reasonably large amount of money, income, funding, and community involvement. And I don't quite think that's the same here. So my question is, while we're acting banker, I understand why. My question is, are we comfortable that money's going to be replaced in there? If your assumption that GM operations is correct.
A more conservative approach has been taken recently, I think, is all we can say in a public meeting at the moment.
Here, Councillor Dolby. Any further questions on the corporate report? Moving through it. The debt, the balance sheet. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to raise a small issue that I think we need to be aware of and could quite dramatically affect our current budgets, and that is the fallout from recent storm damage within Nelson City. We obviously are going to have to find in some form, one way or the other, a certain amount of money to be able to tackle these repairs, whether it be unsubsidised roading or footpaths or whatever. Can I just ask that the officers, as soon as possible, come to us as a council and give us a very strong indication as to what they're looking at over the next 6 months, because this may have an effect or otherwise on our current budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Matheson. Is there any response required to that? Thank you. Assent to that. Further questions on debt balance sheet?
Yeah, just notice on page 111, this is a report as at December. Down the bottom there, we've got some general debtors over 10k or at risk. I just wondered, without going into details, because I don't potentially think we need to, but given that we're now middle of February, I wondered if there was an update on the first two, particularly as to whether that first one was actually resolved and whether the other one was actually paid in January 2018, because it should be paid, I suppose. Two questions arising.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Are you able to respond to those? Or? Right. Nikki, are you able to respond to those?
Through the chair, I'd have to come back to you on those.
Will you do that during the course of the meeting, or will you do it subsequently? Okay, so while Ms. Harrison's looking at that, are there any further questions? Councillor Barr.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, again, the presentation of the information we've got today is very good at a high level for governance, and the infographics really tell a great picture. In terms of the points Mr. Murray made earlier, I would suggest, having gone with other councillors most other councillors a long portion of last week going through the estimates book that perhaps Mr Murray would take up the Chief Executive's offer to have a browse through the estimates book and have a look at the projects that we're doing. It's very meaningful.
It may well be the best way for us to get up to speed on it. We'll look at those options. Further questions as we go through the corporate report? Looking at the major project summary. Mr Murray?
Yeah, thank you. If we're on major projects, I just had a very quick question on page 114. Green Meadows seems to be escalating in terms of its cost and time. And I just wondered if there was a separate report floating around somewhere which sort of approves the additional spend required there as opposed over the budget. So it looks as if we're heading for a higher number, and whether that timing issue has been sorted. So it sort of sits as a red flag in this report as being running late and over budget. Has there been dialogue approvals for that two situations occurring?
Through the chair, there was a PowerPoint presentation given to councillors at the LTP workshops a couple of weeks ago. And a report will follow to confirm the change to time and budget required for this project.
It will go to where?
I expect it will go to the relevant committee and then be on reported to council.
Thank you. Any other questions? I picked up on that one as well, Mr Murray. Noted it was a 16% increase, which led me to go back through some of these, looking at the total original budget column and the forecast total spend column down here, and I noticed that the variations swing. I think the highest is 75% over, and I think is 32% under. So there are some pretty wild swings in those original total budgets and forecast total spends columns. When I looked at them over the total projects that are varying, out of a $26 million original total budget, it's $27.7 million of actual forecast spend, which is a variation of 7%, which is at the upper end of an acceptable variance on capital major capital projects. I think it would be useful for us just to try and keep an eye on some of those, how that total is actually running against budgets, so that we can ascertain exactly the question you've asked, that we are getting the appropriate agreements, authorisations to go through those overruns. And I'm sure this is going to be part of that whole process that the CEO is looking at in relation to assets.
Yes, and one of the discussions we have had is about making sure there are good estimates with realistic conservative contingencies, so that we do protect ourselves against the market. But it is a diabolical market at the moment. There's one project that we've just, tenders have closed. Our estimate was $500,000 and we got two tenders. One was $800,000, one was $1.8 million. It can be tough sometimes to get an estimate when the market is behaving like that. But we need to be better at making sure we've got those contingencies, and that's certainly one of the problems we've identified with Green Meadows. And also the other thing is also to be far more conservative with time scales, we promise, so that we have far more chance to deliver on time and on budget, and not set ourselves up for failure 2 years in advance. And that's something we're doing at the moment, is going through the capital budgets for the first 3 years to make sure that every one of them has an appropriate contingency in it, and that we're not being optimistic.
Thank you, Mr Doctor. Councillor Bucket, you had...
Yeah, a question on page 113 about the modeller's pond, and it's quite interesting to read the process which is taking place under the issues and risks column. We had a budget of over $1 million for it. I'm wondering, is the anticipation that if this trial works, that we can drastically reduce that cost?
Through the chair, that would be ideal. So the trial is expected to take 12 to 18 months, and if that's the case, it will certainly reduce our costs. And when you include the amount of funds that we currently provide toward maintenance, it would reduce some of those too, potentially.
Thank you. And has the resource consent been achieved?
Through the chair, the resource consent has been applied for. What we've done is we've actively worked with our consents department to make sure that they have all the information they need to process the consent, and we're confident there won't be problems.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms Harrison has the answer on those debtors.
So through the chair, just to clarify, the one that was expected in January was paid on the 25th of January, and the item at the top, which was still under negotiation, was actually paid 10 minutes ago.
So it was unpaid when I asked the question. Well, let me ask about more debtors then. Theatre Royal Loan? No.
Thank you for that update, Ms Harrison, and thank you for making that, having that impact on our debtors, Mr Murray. Much appreciated. Any further questions? That brings us to the end of the pages on the corporate report. Any further questions on the corporate report? If not, would somebody move that we receive the report in its attachments? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Dalberg. Is there any further discussion? Not all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We move now, I think, to the internal audit report, and welcome Ms Anderson to the table. Take the report as, you know the rule, you know the process. Ms Anderson, take the report as read. Are there any matters you want to update or bring to our attention?
Thank you. Yes, there's just a little bit of updating to do really, and that's just in relation to the progress of the audits on the audit plan. So on page 124, the contracts renewal at the top of the page there, the draft is nearing completion. So that's on target. Everything's running a little bit late because the audit that was done for the control environment took a little longer than expected. And that particular audit, which is at the bottom, is currently, it's been reviewed by the Chief Executive. It's going before the senior leadership team, not next Monday, but the Monday after the 26th, I think it is. I'm not available next Monday. The Privacy Act audit is, the draft report is completed, and there's a meeting has been organised with the manager for that. And the business continuity planning, that is due for March. That will follow the exercise that we're doing next week on the 23rd of February. And that's looking as though that's going to be all on target. And the water service provision one is, it's been pushed out a wee bit, but I'm fairly confident that that'll be finished by the end of March as well. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms Anderson. So the process is underway. The audits are proceeding. Are there any questions of Ms Anderson relating to this report? Well, if we're going to let Ms Anderson off that lightly, I'll ask that if somebody move the report. Good report. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Dalberg. Thank you, Mr Murray. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. That brings us to the organisational risks, the fourth quarterly report, and welcome Mr Vaughan to the table. Welcome, Steve. Same question. Any updates or points that you would like to emphasise?
works. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is one minor correction on page 135 of the document in front of you. The first point says that there will be a round of workshops and training for contracts management in February. That should read March. The matter previously mentioned by Ms Anderson about the exercise next week has rather delayed a few other things. So a one-word correction in that.
Thank you. We had the report. We have all read it. I'll open it up for questions. Mr. Vaughan. One question that's going through, just note in the key risk areas under item 4, contracts management, the upgrade of the large civil works contract template delayed by lack of technical capacity. Now scheduled, I think it was scheduled now for about October of this year. I looked at. Is there any known ongoing risk relating to that would probably indicate we should seek to get external technical capacity if that's required, or indeed go and steal, borrow somebody else's contract template in this particular space?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a number of issues with what is a rather elderly set of both procurement and contracting procedures under the standard. Perhaps a little bit of explanation is useful to sort of by way of background. NZS 3910 is, as some will know who are associated with standards committees, a document invented by a committee. I sit on the standards committee, so I understand a little of this process. And it is the result of the, shall we say, consensus of those committee members. The committees are volunteers, and a substantial part of the committees are generally contractors in this particular case. This means that every purchasing agency, including ours, has some amendments that it automatically makes to the standard whenever it lets a contract. It is these amendments which are becoming outdated in the technical sense, and the matters, for the most part, references to, for example, other documents which have been superseded and that sort of thing. There are a number of other matters in the other parts of the update which are complete but not yet in use. So the Council, in using its older set of documents, is exposed to some risk because of these outdated bits, if you put it that way, and the sums involved are reasonably large. That having been said, the Council is, of course, in this part of the world, a fairly large player in terms of purchasing civil construction services. And so in general, we've been able to get around these problems. And I guess if I'm being honest, I'm being hopeful that we can continue to do so for another few months until we get the other ones in place.
Thank you for that, Mr. Vaughan. Any other questions? Councillor Delberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 127, I think that's we're up to reputational damage. It says risk movements remains at medium but decreased likelihood. How do we achieve that?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. We've got better at anticipating the things which are likely to cause issues, and our communications team is getting better and better at getting there first. It's basically the simple explanation for that. In general, and some background perhaps for Councillor Delberg may be useful. I think I've mentioned this around this table before. We've moved from an era of very largely the radio and newspaper world to the social media world, and our communications team have had to move with it. And over the last year or so, we've seen ourselves getting better and better at finding those things and not, shall we say, causing false hares to start running.
Thank you.
Okay, but probably
Another
different
one?
than my
So,
perception,
go
but
ahead, Councillor Audit.
can I move to 129 then? The technology, IT, like the comment, risk movement. Do we have a date, new core system hardware fully in place and tested? We have a timeline on that?
I would need to ask our IT services manager to be absolutely certain. I have had some involvement, through you, Mr. Chair, with the contract. I believe the target date is the 20-something of February, 24th,
Through the chair, it's this month.
and it's pretty much on track as I understand it.
Thank you. Councillor Barker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question relative to the page 125, the Lifeline Services and Natural Hazards. Given the events of last week, and given that this estimate of status of risk and impact was made long before what happened last week, is it likely that the position on the graph will change as a result of what happened last week in terms of impact and likelihood?
Thank you, and again, through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to belittle the efforts of the people who were involved in the exercise last week, but in terms of the overall impact on the city compared with, say, a major seismic event, this was actually a relatively small impact. And we can expect these things. And this risk is looking forward. I make this point in the text of the report to you. This risk is looking forward and, if you like, projecting from things. And undoubtedly one of the things which is hitting every local authority in the country is the matter of climate change. And climate change is leading to more frequent and more severe storm events. So I don't think it's a large impact, given that the risk we face, and by we I think I mean every local authority in the country in this case, remains fairly high, simply because to spend the sort of money to shift that risk down is beyond the means of most of us.
Perhaps the most significant thing from a Lifeline's point of view, and I haven't seen the damage reports in detail, was I did hear reports that some of our pump stations were submerged. That is something that we will have to consider. Do we move them away? Do we move them up? What's the plan? But then if all the houses and the gully traps are underwater as well, yeah, it starts to get very tough. But that will be the closest thing that we've been to a Lifelines issue for the Nelson City Council with that event.
Of course, the result of the flooding of the pump stations was environmentally a bad picture for Nelson. So it has significant effect in from that area. News going around the world, around New Zealand, that you can't swim at our beaches is not good news, and it has a reputational damage risk.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Further questions? Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vaughan, I just want to take you to paragraph 4.3 of your report, where you talk about the change to matters in relation to adequate consideration of legal implications, and you've made a change to that measure. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this in public session, but will those matters have been reported up to council level by way of committees or direct to council at some point? Will there be matters? Is this committee aware, and furthermore, is this committee aware of what those matters might be?
Thank you again, through you, Mr. Chair. If I could confine my responses to a general one in the interests of the inference of what the Mayor has said. The Council has debated a number of these things over the last year. Can I draw your attention, I think, without causing any issues, to the debates held over the last year in relation to the Brook Sanctuary as one example of where we faced legal issues. Ultimately, we ended up in that case as a matter of public record before the High Court, and the case against us was thrown out.
Further questions?
So just a further question. So, Mr. Vaughan, in assessing this, is this in part because when you're looking at this, you're saying council itself has a number of issues that may lend themselves to litigious responses. Essentially, that we have a series of issues that where litigation may be raised against us that we need to respond to, or is it more than that, in that we need to be seeking perhaps greater legal advice and before we take steps in terms of decision making? Is it a combination, or is it lending more? What's the trend that's caused you to change this?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, through you. The answer is a bit of both in reality. We in the local authority sense face a very difficult task in relation, and I'll make no apology about saying this in public, in relation to the sheer volume of statute and regulation we're obliged to do things in relation to. I did a little bit of work last year when this issue first came up with the Society of Local Government Managers. They did some very brief estimation for me and then said, I'm sorry, we haven't got any more money. But the answer was that there are something like 300 statutes and regulations, pieces of legislation, which require the council to either comply with something or do something, act to control dogs, for example. Keeping up with this is always going to be a complex task. There have been over the last year some, in the string of things that come before council, some quite complex legal dimensions as well. And again, I would refer Madam Mayor back to the Brook Sanctuary case and the sort of contortions that was involved in that, or the set of circumstances.
Through Mr. Chair, just one final question. Oh, sorry, just one final question. Just in relation to this report, I just want to make double sure I've got this right. So this is reported as the fourth quarterly report. So we're doing annual year, are we here, as opposed
yes, this is,
to, you're right,
sorry,
based on a
Mr.
calendar
Chairman,
year.
it's a calendar year. It says quite clearly at the front of this. I asked the committee about this at the beginning of this year, and that's what that's what you asked for. I'm happy to change it to a financial year if you're more comfortable, but that's what you asked for at the beginning of this year in the seminar.
No, it was really just for clarity, that I wasn't heading in that direction at the moment, but it was just in terms of clarity. So in terms of your assessment of the adequacy of council records, you have assessed all matters right up till 31 December when considering the risk profile.
Mr. Chairman, through you, yes.
Okay,
it's a multi-year response to this issue, I should also say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we are looking to make some changes to the staff structure, and I've briefed some of the chairs and the mayor on this, and hope to send something out today. But we started talking with staff yesterday about the changes, and one of the changes will be to get our legal counsel higher in the organisation, so that they're sitting at fourth tier at the moment. The proposal is to move that person to a third tier position, and also have them sitting somewhere close to my office as well. I want that person to be nearer the hub of the organisation, so that we can have more proactive advice before we do things. As has been indicated, we're always going to be challenged. That's the nature of our business, but it's important that we are on a strong footing and have the best advice before we start. So that's why one of those changes is being made, is to get our legal advisors closer to the front and closer to the centre.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I think that makes a lot of sense. Further questions or discussions?
Yeah, thanks, through Mr. Chair. Just back to this legal issue, I'm just, the commentaries about acting, making a decision or the consequences. Do you have a view on our liability on failing to act, where we may be perceived to owe a duty of care, or it's an obligation on us to alert, and someone suffers a loss and says, well, let's go for the deep pocket defendant, or the council will do. I'm just wondering if a view on how you might quantify that loss, as that's factored into your thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, there are several dimensions to this. Can I pick a couple for illustrative purposes? The council, very roughly, and this is the figure I give to people when we are dealing with the matter of doing contracting properly, is very roughly $100 million a year business. Very roughly 75 million of those dollars goes out the door to contractors every year. The space where there is contract dispute is one where the council's pockets can be reached into, and it is definitely one where we have made some major improvements over the last 12, perhaps 18 months now. We still have some large contracts which are a bit creaky, and those will start, I think, to flow through. Certainly I have some on my work program for the next 6 months. So that's one area. There are always going to be, with a business as complex as a unitary authority, there are always going to be some other areas. We have both the regional council and the territorial authority functions to deal with, and I go back to that estimate of 300 items of legislation that we are in some way bound by.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Officer Vaughan. I'm looking at page 118, 3.3, and you say there, while most business units have a reasonably well-established risk management process in place, there's some catch-up for new units, and you cite the City Development Unit as one. What priority has that work got as far as you're concerned?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Through you, the specific answer with respect to city development is I sat down with one of their senior staff on last Thursday to begin that process. That was, somebody's going to have to tell me precisely, but that was about a month after they started themselves up and tried to sort out what they were doing. So we try to give this pretty high priority.
Excuse me, you see a large body of work there, do you, or is it
no?
There's a template.
No, there's a template. There are a number of tools that we pull out and help people with, and it's part of my job to help them do that.
And just out of curiosity, what other business units, you talk about new business units, and you give one example. I'm just wondering what the others were.
The others are new managers very often. We have the unit which looks after the running of this committee, who has a new manager who's been here for a little time, and I sat down with her yesterday to work through the same sort of process. Some going back a little bit further have larger chunks of work and a different focus. Parks and facilities springs to mind, where there was a major change in the remit of that unit, and we're still working through the processes with them, but a lot further down the track.
Thank you. I just have one question in relation, page 132, the fraud, corruption, theft. I note that the indications are that treatments are all in place and are now there as controls. However, I notice there's no, part of the controls is not a confidential independent fraud line, which a number of organisations of this size have. Do we have such a thing, or is something planned in that space?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we most certainly do. It should be listed here. It's called, it has a name, it sort of has its trade name.
Reported now, that's what that is. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's been in place for at least 2 years now, to my knowledge.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, I'd ask that somebody move the report be received. Councillor Barker, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Dahlberg. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And we move to health, safety and well-being, and welcome Mr. Hughes. I see various people looking at watches. I had this meeting is going through till 12, so if I'm the only one who thinks that, then my apologies, but that's what it said, because the next meeting starts at 1, doesn't it? Did you want a cup of tea, John, did you? Okay, thank you. I prefer that. Let's keep going then. Welcome, Mr. Hughes. It's a request for a comfort stop, was it? No, people can go do that. Okay, let's have a 3-minute break, because there's a general movement and twitchiness.
maintenance at Stoke Library during November. And the other point is the change to the key risk reporting, both in the format and the risks as they were reviewed in November. They're all outlined within the report.
Thank you. I thought it was a good report, easy report. So I caught sight of Councillor Courtney, followed by Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to Officer Hughes. Where is your focus, your main focus going at the moment? What's your greatest concern in this area at this time?
Through the Chair, in health and safety in general, or the security issues?
Health and safety in general. Just what's the piece of work you're working on? What do you focus on at the moment?
Security at libraries is by far the biggest piece of work. It has been over the last couple of months.
That's all library. That's both our libraries, or the 3 libraries, or?
Stoke has been most of the work. However, a lot of the controls are being implemented at the other libraries as well. There is, I guess, the issues at the main, our maternal library are more broad and not particularly bad at the moment, but overall, and over time, a number of issues they're dealing with there, whereas the issues at Stoke are quite specific to a group of youth.
Excuse me, could I just keep discussion around the security at libraries until we look at the specific report on that? I think it'd be useful rather than crossing over between the 2 reports, otherwise it's going to get a little bit confusing.
Very, very happy with that, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson.
No, I'm yet to, my questions were concerning the library security, so I'll wait. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if we keep them separate, it's probably better. Mr Murray.
Thank you. Two questions, if I may. Page 141 has a table on it, incidents and assurance activity, and there's item 1's duty to zero harm and item 2's hazards and near misses. I suppose the pleasing thing about both of those graphs is that they've all got a southward declining trend on them, meaning there's less and less in this space. When I read that, I thought, well, that's fabulous, but I just wondered if that was actually a situation where we've got reporting jaundice coming through, where people are sort of going, you know, we had this initial, wow, we've got the system, we've got to report stuff, and now we're sort of getting over that, so less and less is being reported, but yet the activity's still the same. Or is it a genuine, we're doing way, way better in this space? So that's the first question. I'll just let you answer that one, I'll come to the second one in a minute.
Through the Chair, I can offer an explanation on that. If you look at the 2017 figures, you'll see that there's a little bit of fluctuation, but they're quite low consistently throughout the year. The 2016 figures coincide with both the establishment of the database, so quite a push on reporting initially, but also at that change at the beginning of last year, we changed the way contractor incidents are reported to reflect our level of influence and control and therefore responsibility in regard to those incidents. So the majority of contractor incidents are now captured only as a monthly summary, as an assurance event rather than specific incidents. It's only the ones over the threshold of, I believe, minor consequence from memory that are captured in here. So that explains a lot of the change. So possibly a bit of both, but right.
Okay, but we are doing better, is I suppose the upshot.
I think we're doing quite well, particularly when you look at the higher severity one. There hasn't been anything since April. Yeah, so I think it's good data.
Okay, thank you. My second question, or it's more a wee bit of a confusing matter, and I raised this before, and I think when you get a moment, I'd ask you just to do a little bit more work around this particular item when you get a moment. It's not urgent. But on 146, we have 2 graphs there. We've got the top one is total sick leave taken, which interestingly to me says that it's pretty static between 2016 2017. So one would imply that the health of our workforce is relatively consistent by that graph. But it's the one underneath that sort of relates to it, which talks about the Times Workplace support access by staff, which is a record of when people ring the support network that we've got in place for them. And the bit that really confused it, and while you sort of tried to explain it, is when I look at the numbers in there that's reported, in the blue line, which is work-related matters, I think for October to December, we've got about 140 work matters being talked about. And then in the personal column, about 70, which is, to me, 210 times, which out of a staff of 280 odd, seems really, really, really high to me. And it could just be the way it's reported, but I sort of, well, I don't know if it is high. That's the problem. So I look at that number of 210 things being reported in either space through to these counsellors and support people. I look at our total number of staff and I think this is too high. So then I go, if I am in fact right that it is high, right, and I don't know if it is or it isn't, but say it is, we've got a problem and we need to do something about it. Now, if it's an environmental problem here in the workspace, then that's our issue to deal with, but I don't know. And so I'm trying to drill into that number and trying to understand it in terms of, are we doing everything we can to minimise that if indeed it is a high number, if that makes sense. But it just seems too high to me as it's reported.
Through the chair, I think part of the work I need to do is change the title, because where I've said the Times workplace support is accessed by staff is possibly a little bit misleading. What we're actually reporting on is matters raised. So one consultation, anything that results in a significant discussion. So one consultation may have several significant discussions. Two of them might be about workplace matters, one might be about a personal matter, and that would count as 3 for this reporting. So that's just to clarify that aspect of it. I think you did also note in the October-December quarter that there is a slight increase in the workplace versus personal matters. Now we have looked a little bit, we do have a little bit more detail and depth to look at there. We don't report on that, particularly because we're getting close to where it could identify individuals and compromise their privacy.
Through the chair, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I just I've popped up because it's perhaps helpful for the subcommittee to understand that we do have a lot of, we do provide the opportunity, a high opportunity for staff members to interact with the counsellor. We have a relatively generous model of workplace support provision. Many organisations, for instance, simply provide the ability for an employee to ring an 0800 number and talk to and make an arrangement with a counsellor. We have what I would call a high-touch model of provision here, which means that we actually have a counsellor on site for a number of hours a week, and she actually goes and visits staff. So there is much more opportunity for these matters to be raised, and it's at least partly a reflection of our really quite generous model of workplace support provision. There are a lot of matters raised, and that's because we provide extra opportunity for them to be raised.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. May need to come back again. Just want to explore that a little bit further. So what we're seeing in terms of the numbers, so it's just for us to interpret this. In a session with a counsellor, the counsellor is essentially keeping I'm going to use the word a score of the number of issues raised, whether they're workplace or personal. Is that somewhat superficial? I'm sorry to be quite, rather than getting to what is the underlying cause of the issue. So that's one thing. I'm just wondering how in the world you could end up with someone with a, some people focus on the critical issue. Some people have a shopping list of issues. It's and whether that would distort what we're seeing. I'm also interested in whether we're seeing a few people using the service many times, or lots of people using the service once. In that basis, because I can't tell now from that graph.
Through the chair, our data doesn't tell us which of those things it is. However, I know that the counsellor is on site and talking to quite a large number of people each week. So we provide 2 arms of the service. So she is here, or they. We actually have 2 counsellors on site through the course of a month, a male and a female. So they are on site talking to people, and those interactions are not booked or scheduled. They are a matter of encounter. We also have people who do ring up and specifically want counselling sessions. So there are certainly people having more intensive interactions with a counsellor, which may or may not be the same person as that we've got on site. So I suspect that doesn't answer your question, but at the moment we have, workplace support take the confidentiality of the reporting quite seriously. So we have talked to them, I have talked to them at least on one occasion about the level of detail provided in the report, and they're not willing to break it down further.
Look, I think I think some of the answers to my questions might mean I don't know, actually, and that probably leaves us in a little bit of a quandary as to how we, how the subcommittee respond to this in terms of meaningful governance. I'm just not sure that this is taking us where we need to get to, Mr. Chair.
I agree, and I think the issue, and it goes back to one of the points Mr. Murray made. How would we know if there was a consistent issue relating to environment, work conditions, or something like that? I mean, would we expect that to come through a different avenue rather than through an employee assistance support program? Or is there some arrangement in place where you have enough confidence that if the counsellors see a trend, they're going to let you know of that trend? I mean, how does it work?
Yes, I think the answer is that we monitor a range of metrics, if you like. So if I think if we were to see a steady pattern of change in this particular report over time, then we'd have reason to be concerned, unless it was going in the right direction, of course. But we also, as you'll be well aware, we track sick leave usage, we track workplace injuries, we have exit surveys, we have internal surveys of existing employees. I'm sure there's some other things that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but we don't simply look at one measure. We of course have the external reporting service Report It Now. So it isn't a matter of one metric providing us the answer. It is monitoring a range of things.
Councillor Goldberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my concern is if I was a public out there reading this, or some media person, and I see there that's in July, September, it's 260 events happening in here, and the staff numbers, you're kind of thinking we've got a major problem. Yet what I'm hearing is it is kind of, but if it's really significant, it pops out as a separate item. I think you need a note. I think this thing, almost item 9, needs a note to clarify I read what it's saying there, multiple things, etc., but it really gets down to we don't know. I would have thought this should have been divided into, really important stuff that we need to take action and bring to another consultant, etc., and just that stuff that needs to be talked through. Because that's a bit I want to know, how really bad problems we have.
I mean, in my experience, an employee assistance program, one of its major requirements is confidentiality. So I can understand the difficulty of finding out what the content is behind these, but I also pick up on the point that on the face of it, the information we see, it's easy to look at it and think, gosh, we must have a problem. Because I haven't seen EAP confidential reporting sort of quantified to this extent. And so it is a mixed message that's being sent. So as Councillor Goldberg says, maybe it's worth trying to explain that in some way, or question the fact as to whether this is a meaningful metric from a perspective of governance interest and governance input. It may well be of useful value at an HR level and at a senior management level, but in terms of it from a governance metric, it may not we may not need to see it. It's something we can perhaps have a look at, but
Can I make a, yeah, of course. It's more of a question. So Steve, am I right in thinking that those stats are a combination of the councillors walking around the building and having casual conversations with staff, and they may raise something with them, combined with people going to more intensive individual counselling sessions?
Yes, that's correct. That's my understanding.
So can we not break it out into the two?
I will certainly raise that with workplace support. We don't have the data at present. I'm willing to raise that with workplace support to see if they're able to do that.
Because I think it's that second piece of data. I mean, there's no doubt that there is a value in having the workplace support, someone walking around the building and having the conversations as an early warning system, but it's the people who are seeking support from a counsellor is you know, and a one-on-one session, I think, is the more specific data that you are looking for, and looking for trends in that. And the other one, so Steph ran through a list of things that measure the health of an organisation. The other one, of course, is turnover, is the critical one. And it is that suite of information that gives you a picture of how the organisation is looking and feeling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on page 146, in relation to sick leave, total sick leave taken, you see there that there's obviously, through the winter months, the sickness levels go up. I wonder how we compare elsewhere. 200 days of sick leave equates to 40 weeks work. And that doesn't include those staff members who don't have sick leave entitlement, as I read this. So that figure could be higher than 200 days. How does that compare to other organisations? It seems extraordinarily high.
Through the chair, I'm not aware that, I don't know the answer to that. But we can probably access data to relate to that, some benchmark data. To me, it is consistent. The seasonal differences are consistent with other organisations, but I don't have data on that, sorry.
So I have to say that an organisation that relies a lot on open plan offices, the one thing I'm quite paranoid about is if someone starts coughing and sniffling, I'll tell them, you've got sick leave, go home, because that's what it's for. And you know, it's interesting, you know, that it does peak in the winter time, and with what 240 full-time equivalents, that's less than a day each at a bad time of year. But if we don't encourage people to take sick leave, then it gets worse. It gets worse a whole lot more quickly, and you can end up with a third or a half of your staff off sometimes. It's certainly something I encourage staff to do is, you know, if they're sick, stay home. I don't want heroes, that's for sure. It does us no favours.
Yeah, I can appreciate that and agree with you. I'm just wondering, is it possible to get what is the figures that are not shown here? Those staff who run out of sick leave entitlement and taking leave without pay on their sickness, does our level increase significantly because of that or not?
Through the chair, I have been unable to get that data from the finance people that provide this. But what they do also, note on their reports is the number of people that have taken more than, I think it's 2 or 3 days in a month, is noted on their things. So definitely, if there was individuals with issues, that is raised or highlighted. Obviously not reported for privacy reasons.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions, we have a a motion that the Audit, Risk and Finance Subcommittee receives the report.
Yes, I'm happy to move that recommendation, Mr. Chair, but I perhaps would just like noted in the minutes that perhaps the reporting over organisational health needs some further consideration in terms of staff wellbeing. That's section 2, just in terms of how that's reported through to us. And I did note Chief Executive's comment that a good measure to consider when you're looking at organisational health is turnover, and the officers might just want to consider whether that's something they bring up through this report. Thank you.
I agree. I think that would be a good thing to do. Sorry, do I have a seconder before I open it for further discussion? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Any further discussion? Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just wondering, I suppose, what our obligations are is that we provide a safe and inclusive workplace. And I'm just wondering if there's some comment about any emerging trends that are coming through various forms of data, like you've got EAP, ACC, there's the councillors, there's even from line managers, even self-reporting. So I'm just wondering if it would be helpful if we're thinking about emerging trends that are happening in other workplaces that around the country, that we're sufficiently ahead of the ball there, that we're anticipating those sorts of issues before they become a real problem within our own organisation.
Thank you for that suggestion. I take that on board. Thank you. If there's no further discussion. Sorry, just at this point, I just want to check something, that it's only the quarterly health and safety report that goes through to council. This is just an update that is purely for this committee, so this does not go through to council, is that correct? Procedurally?
So, through the chair, in discussions with the new chief exec and looking at the resolutions that did go through to the actual council, the resolutions that were going through to council weren't necessarily meaningful because they were just acknowledging this report, but they weren't actually getting the report. So I think, to be really clear, it's all council's responsibilities to go in to team site and familiarise themselves with the health and safety report and be familiar with what their duties are. The way that it was being reported to council was not that helpful.
So are we saying that there won't be any reports on health and safety going from this committee to council?
Through the chair, unless there was a specific item that wanted to be reported through. No, basically this report is being received by this committee, who has a delegation for health and safety within its delegations.
I'll obviously be guided by the organisation and by council on that. It had been my understanding that because councillors carry personal responsibility for health and safety, that there was a requirement that that report be made available to them, or they be made aware of it. If it's adequate to do it online for them, I'll take guidance from that. But my understanding was that while it was delegated to this committee, it was for us to look at the detail, but to then provide some kind of assurance that it's in hand. So, Councillor Dahlberg.
Just additional information, Mr. Chair, is that a range of this report, including turnover, does appear in the Chief Executive's committee, Remuneration Committee. We do cover off some of that as well.
Understood, but not all councillors sit on that committee. Ma'am.
Mr. Chair, just picking up on your comments, I would hope that there is a good system. Yes, it is the elected members' responsibility as officers under the Act, but that needs to be supported by good systems to make sure that they have meaningful access to the information and then an opportunity to follow up should they have a concern. So I just would like, I'm not sure in my mind that putting something on team site that not all councillors actually access is actually the way to go around that. I'll just leave that for the officers to consider, of what is a good system to ensure that the avenues are there so that elected members can discharge their responsibilities.
look, we can send out an email to all councillors highlighting the fact the report's there, and if they've got any questions, contact Malcolm in the first instance, and if he can't answer the questions, come to me, so that there is the opportunity. And let's not forget that while all the councillors may have personal responsibility for health and safety, if something goes wrong, it's me that goes to jail. So be assured, I'm highly motivated in this space.
Thank you. Well, with that clarification, then it is purely that at this stage that this committee receives the report. It's been proposed and seconded. No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carries. Thank you. We move now to the security incidents at council libraries report. Again, take that as read, and any updates or emphasis, Mr. Hughes, on that you want to make before we open it up for questions?
Nothing specific, just that as a result of the senior leadership meeting yesterday, some of the treatments are being further progressed, but nothing significant to change in the report.
Thank you. I'll open it, and I recall that there was Councillor Courtney was talking. I think Councillor Goldberg had a question on it, and I know Councillor Matheson has. So we'll go in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to Officer Hughes. I was asking the question simply because in your report, your earlier report, you said you've been involved extensively with handling disruptions at the Stoke Library in November and December, and I wanted to know in my questioning what was your focus now. This is February, you see. So I gleaned from that you've been really intensely working on this for the last 4 months or more. Is that right?
It's been, I guess, when it comes to project works or things that come up, it's been a significant focus. There's, the majority of my work is the routine day-to-day stuff, providing advice to other officers, providing reports to SLT and ARF, monitoring data, incident data that comes in, and a number of other things have been happening. This has been a significant piece of it, and taking a large time, piece of most of the time that's available for project work or new work.
Mr. Chair, through you, are you going to recommend to some department of council how we rectify or correct this problem? Have you got suggestions like building design or say Wi-Fi or something to move these people on? Or have you got
through the chair, it is I think, as I've alluded to in the report, it is quite a complex issue, and there is, this report for governance purposes doesn't have a lot of the detail of some of the other reports that were written, that the information that was provided to me that I created this report from. There's a lot going on, and I guess it's at the stage now where that is being pushed back out to the relevant teams to progress and to deal with and to consider as changes are made, as Stoke Library improvements come up in the long-term plan, longer-term solutions or alternative activities for youth at Stoke will go to community partnerships team, and a number of things like that, and the general day-to-day running of it will be handed back to libraries. There was just a need. The problem was of such state that it needed someone to, I guess, run the project for a time before it could be handed back to teams as business as usual, I guess. And
can we wait, Mr. Chairman? Can we wait for? Can we sit and wait for long-term plans and Stoke projects and so forth when you've got an incident, happening like this that's occupying you for 4 months, and I want to really hear from you, or some indication as to whether there's something we should be doing. That's the point, to remedy this. And that's why I put up a couple of suggestions and wondered whether someone might hear them.
Through the chair, there's been a number of things done already, and so the problem is largely under control. But we haven't yet, I don't think we have yet got a long-term solution to the problem, and that's, and those are being worked on. As we put things in place and try things and the situation evolves, we learn more and more about it and learn more about what might work and what will work in the long time. And an example is the initial report on safety through environmental environmental design, recommended shifting the entrance around to the street corner, rather of the opposite side to it is now. And so that's included in there as something to look at in the improvements to Stoke Library. However, more recent reviews of the youth worker engagement, they've actually been trying to sort of move them to that area to get them away from the entrance and where they're in the face of the public. So we would need to consider that carefully when it came up. But the plan is that these things will be captured and not forgotten, and that when we do come to review those plans, that this information is included, that safety and design is included in everything we build.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. And when I note the 9 items of controls and treatments that already are under place on pages 163 and 164. So clearly some things have already been happening, and as you mentioned, SLT has indicated your introductory comment that things are moving, things are progressing through SLT. I think Councillor Dahlberg was next.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your report. And I've noticed in the last 8 or so months, this is becoming more of a focus, which is really good. When you read that bit about youth made threats previous week and someone's getting attacked on their way home, not good. And I'm not too sure how we step that up with some sort of warning device, or, I see you mentioning that there about alarms and attention, which is great. I see here also about the CTV footage, cameras. Obviously deterrence is a good idea, you're onto that, I'm really pleased about that. And the more that gets known, maybe those chance of someone taking that chance, you're onto that, it's great. And I appreciate the fact we're getting told as well, as councillors. The question probably also is that the person in charge of these committees, I'm thinking chair and deputy, I'm assuming they get informed as these happen before it hits the media instances.
I know the Community Services Group Manager did advise the Chair of the Community Services Committee around some of these key incidents. I'm not sure around the remainder or what advice was given to this committee apart from that was coming through, that's come through in my reports.
I think the issue on these things is usually timely reporting. We will look at the overall governance aspects of it. So this is the opportunity through this report, but I think from a media management perspective, direct contact that has been made from the community, the Group Manager Community Services to the Chair of that committee is the way to go. This committee doesn't need to know at that particular point in time, unless it is of an escalation level that the Chief Executive deems appropriate that we be informed. Thank you, Councillor Dahlberg. I think Councillor Matheson was.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Malcolm, this issue isn't new, especially in Stoke, and the Mayor will agree with me that we had a couple of instances, and we had a meeting one day with the Superintendent of Police over the intimidation of this group of youths who intimidated shopkeepers at certain times of the afternoon and harassed the staff, and that was raised ironically with us by Kim, who's got Squire's Coffee House, when she felt uncomfortable. Superintendent's reply was interesting because the police station is over the road. They all go over to the square, Strawberry Square, and around that area for their lunch, and she was going to ask them to put their hats on, so it looked like we had an increased activity from the police. Don't know whether it happened or not, but Kim from Squires told me a month later that things had quietened down considerably for some reason, and I think that was a simple deterrent. I was in the library one day doing my job as a justice, and a screwdriver was produced on a group of youths who were trying to hide in the Wi-Fi department, and I was alerted to that, and I reported it to Mr. Waters of that incident. The staff were reluctant to call the police. I felt that was not the best call in the world, but these things happen. In the winter time it gets just as bad in the libraries because it's a warm place for the homeless to be, and that in its own way can be intimidating. I agree with what you've written here as far as deterrents go, but the one that is really disturbing is the activity in Stoke. And until we address where we're going to in our next stage for youth gathering areas in whatever form, this will continue. There is a whole new bunch of young people in the Stoke area who have, over the last 12 to 18 months, have decided to claim the territory bit, and it happens to be outside the library is the point. So I would, through you, Mr. Chair, totally encourage the council to put their efforts and activity to try and address the problem at Stoke, because the nature of the population is older and far easily intimidated by that sort of activity. And I think that's number one priority. Number two will be the element in the library in town, and I think that's a matter of who's going to control the area inside where the Wi-Fi is. Seems to be the gathering point for the odd piece of disturbance as well. That's my observations, and I concur Stoke is a top priority for us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Further comments in relation to this report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, over the holiday period, on a number of occasions, as I live in the area, I noticed community constables there, groups of youths, and activities taking place that I didn't get involved, but the image was not good. I'm wondering what's happened to the property that council set up, a previous council laws, in Karaka Street, which was provided for these people that I understand from the security officer told me where these people that are causing problems come from, was set up for that community. Is it still owned by council, and is it still able to be used?
I can answer if I can. House 44 you're referring
That's
to?
the one.
No, it's closed down.
Do we still own them?
That I can answer. Mr. Ward may be able to.
So through the chair, my understanding is that was never owned by council. It was funded through the Community Assistance Fund, and there were some issues in terms of the management and eventually the trust that supported that house wound up.
Thank you.
And I just had a further question. The incident at the Nelson Library, Albertona Library, that's reported in here with sewing machine needles and straws, to me, is frighteningly serious. What could have happened? Eyesight could have gone. All sorts of things that potentially could happen. Were the police involved in that?
Through the chair, absolutely. This one was immediately reported to the police. Also, you know, when we looked at what further controls we could put in place to prevent this type of incident, I was scratching my head, you know. Apart from improving this CCTV system, so we were more likely to be able to find who had actually done it and have them apprehended by the police. And all we could really do was offer infectious disease testing to the people that were injured by the needles, and support to them. There wasn't a lot we could do in regard to this incident, but totally agree, it was very disturbing and the risks were incredible. But if anyone's got any ideas about what you can do about that,
Thank you.
I'm listening.
CCTV cameras are the answer. The data that's coming through is I'm not sure where I read it in media just in the last few days. Seasoned burglars were interviewed as to what is the biggest deterrent to them. And the biggest deterrent is CCTV cameras or barking dogs. So we can't have dogs in the library, but
Okay, thank you.
cameras might be an idea.
Madam Mayor, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Look, I do, Mr. Chair, and it's probably to bring a slightly different context to this discussion from a governance perspective. I think this is a very good report, and it discloses a number of issues and a number of responses, and the issues and the responses are complex. There isn't one solution here. We're looking at social issues, and these are public spaces, and we all have a responsibility. This isn't a council issue, this is a whole of community issue, and what we'll see is some trends over time, and I would say that some of those issues may actually have reduced now as a result of some other activity that the police have been engaged in. Often it'll be a small number of people that are creating the impetus for some of these activities, and those people come and go from different areas depending on what their circumstances are. But overall, I think what we've got to be mindful of is that when people are bored, sometimes they do things that are, not the best choices. And so what I'm really impressed with here is that we've seen a health and safety response that has engaged our community partnerships team, and there's another piece of work that will be coming through the Community Services Committee. And I think the community partnerships team have brought, together with the other agencies that are out there that have the social, social work responsibilities. And I know we keep hearing from the police, and rightly so, that the biggest job that they're doing at the moment is actually operating as social workers. That needs to change, actually. That does need to change. That will always be part of their role, and it will always be part of our role. But the best result is when all of the agencies that have a responsibility to communicate to our community are communicating well. And I think there has been a real step change in that space over the last, probably over the last 6 months, as I've watched council re-engage with what used to be called Talking Heads, but it's now got a new name. There's really good dialogue going between agencies on a range of issues, and some great initiatives that I'm happy to brief the council on just as they come together over the next few months. But I think we're heading in the right direction here. I would note in the long-term plan that we'll be consulting on the importance of our youth park in Stoke, and we're really keen for young people to be there as champions of that, to be coming forward and leading that project. So let's hope that out of what has been a very serious series of very serious incidents for our staff and our public, actually what it does is it brings people together to say, all right, we can do better as a community, because I think we can, and I think we will.
Thank you, Madam. Okay, if there's no further comment, could I have a mover, please, that report be received? Thank you, Councillor Goldberg. A seconder for that? I'm happy to second that. There's no further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
No, there is no update. I guess if it's helpful if I were to cut a long story short, our ability to recruit people is a result of both pull factors, if you like, and push factors. So those pull factors are the external factors that draw people out of the organisation, and the push factors are the internal factors that lead people to seek employment elsewhere. We are at a time of relatively high pull factor, so we respond to that in a number of ways, which I've laid out in this report, and we're also doing our very best to look after to reduce the push factors, and that's about working on our workplace physical environments, cultural environment, learning, career development, and those kind of opportunities.
Thank you. I suppose it's been percolating a little bit, and my apologies for the directness of these two questions. The question one is do we have a staff turnover problem? And question two is do we have a problem attracting staff?
The answer to your first question is I am currently concerned about our turnover rate. I'll be shortly reporting to the Chief Executive Employment Committee. Our turnover rate has gone from a low, our voluntary turnover rate has gone from a low of, I think 10.8% 15 months ago to 18.2 or 4% as of the 31st of December. It's not quite doubled, but it is too high. It is higher than we want.
Okay,
And
thank
sorry,
you.
the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is do we have a problem with attracting and recruiting people?
No, the answer to that is I believe we're still able to attract and recruit very good people. We have, and historically we've always had some areas which are particularly difficult to recruit to. Some of those, generally that's been those specialised professional areas. Engineering is a classic example, planners. They're no easier to recruit to now than ever. But we are still getting people who want to work here, who are very high calibre, and who have got every reason to want to have in the organisation.
Okay, so for my simple mind, which is pretty simple at times, we've got a bit of turnover, so we need to have a think about how we're retaining our people because it's a little bit too high. So that's part one, and part two is for the vacancies we do have. You were saying, given the strategies here in the market we're currently sitting with, we should be able to recruit into those relatively easily with the right people.
Relatively easy is a difficult thing to define. So one of the responses when we are having increased challenges with recruiting is to be more flexible about who we recruit. So it's not about taking people of lower calibre, but sometimes it's about taking someone into the organisation who has less experience than we were necessarily anticipating, or alternatively taking someone with more experience. But sometimes we don't work that out until the second time we've had to recruit for a role. So we go out, we're unsuccessful finding the right person, so we go back to the drawing board and go, okay, what do we really need? Let's be a bit more flexible about who we consider. And so generally that is, that's sometimes what we do the second time round. But we've certainly done both of those things on more than one occasion during the last 12 months. Sometimes it is just we can't find the person that we pictured in our mind the first time we went out, but we need to get a bit more flexible, and we can get just as good people by being a bit more open about who we bring in, without reducing the calibre of the people we hire.
Thank you. Supplementary question, if I may. So just for the sake of my own mindset. And you may not have this, and if you haven't, just say, look, I'll get back to you on that at some stage. But and it's a matter of interest, really, just so that I can sort of gauge how we're sitting here. But how many long-term vacancies have we got in the organisation that we can't fill? So these are ones where we've identified we need someone sitting in that seat. We've been trying to fill it, and we can't. Is it like 1 or 2, or is it 10 or 20, or is it 100?
As of the 31st of January, we had 3 vacancies that we were currently recruiting for that had been vacant for longer than 6 months. One of those was the Kaihotu role, which had been on hold for quite a long time, so we hadn't been actively attempting to fill that. The other 2 were roles that fit into those, were precisely those areas. One was a planner role, and one was an engineering officer role. At least with the planner role, we actually did hire a person during that time, but we had 2 vacancies essentially. So we're still finding people. It's just that of the 2 vacancies, it's taken us more than 6 months to fill both of them. That may be true of the engineer. I'm a little less clear. I'm certain of the details on the engineering officer.
Thank you. Chief Executive wanted to make a comment, and then I've got Councillor Delvaux.
So just to add to what Steph was saying, one of the challenges we do face though is unless we poach someone from Tasman District Council, and that's usually a pretty balanced, we steal one, they steal one. People have to move here. It's not like when I was recruiting in Kapiti, if there was someone in the Wellington region, they had to decide did they want to drive 30 minutes to work as opposed to 10 minutes. They've got to move their family, so that it's important that our offering is good from a lifestyle point of view. So even the cost of housing in Nelson can be working against us at the moment. If they're living somewhere where their average house price is $100,000 less than here, then that can be a disincentive that has nothing to do with the council. But local government is a small field, so people certainly do the due diligence about what's the culture of the organisation, what's the standard of the office accommodation like in the organisation. That matters to people. As I said, house price, and what's the council like to work with. That's certainly something that senior staff ask as well. So there's a whole range of factors, and if we want to get people to shift to Nelson, then we have to be at the top of our game on as many of those as we control as possible.
And exactly on point. And I suspect that while we're talking about vacancies that we know are empty seats, there's probably a section that says these are the positions that we need to put in place and then fill. So there's a little bit of that as well, which is probably just going to compound the recruitment rate and the recruitment challenge. So yeah, I think we've got a bit of a challenge ahead of us in this space for those reasons.
Oh, absolutely, and we're talking about that, about how we approach this, but we need to get the total number of vacancies down. I suspect that if we can get the vacancies down and get some of the extra staff we're talking about through the LTP, then hopefully counselling sessions could reduce as well. Because workplace stress can be a big driver of that, just sheer workload.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Councillor Galbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question would be on the voluntary turnover rate of 10.8 to 8.2. So probably two things. What's an average in the industry, and sort of what should we be having as an acceptable rate?
The last figures that I saw on New Zealand turnover are rather out of date now. So it was a report I saw a few months ago, and of course based on previous. But from memory, that turnover rate in the government sector was about 16%. So we are higher than that. I think 16% is higher than desirable as well.
Can I just clarify, is that local government or government generally?
That was government generally, central and local.
Because different sectors within government have very, very different turnover rates. Police would be very different to health, health would be very different to education, and I'm sure that would apply for local authority. Is there no LGNZ or local government specific figures available for turnover that relate purely to councils?
There is a PricewaterhouseCooper local government survey, which I have access to, but I'm afraid I can't bring I don't have the comparative figure to hand.
Would be interesting. I mean, some of the key things in this area, our turnover relative to other turnovers and our average time to fill, are key things relating to this particular area, the difficulty.
I think
because they
I'm
change
unlikely.
the nature of how you go about it.
Apologies, if I may. I think I'm unlikely to be able to find benchmark data on average time to fill for local government. I'm not aware that that's a metric that's collected and published anywhere, but certainly turnover should be achievable.
That may actually be an interesting one, not necessarily to try and use on a local government basis, but almost on a Nelson local basis, discussions with people like police, with the DHB, and people like that, picking up on the points that CEO made about having to attract people to this area. Certainly that's been those relative comparisons were useful to us in the health sector.
So my gut feel would be that if you're sitting around about the 12-13% mark for voluntary turnover, then you're doing well. That means people are staying on average 7 to 8 years, which is pretty good. During the GFC, the peak of it in Kapiti, our turnover dropped down to just under 8%, and to be honest, that was slightly too low. When people leave, you have opportunities to make changes, change the structure, etc. And with that lower turnover, we weren't getting those opportunities. So personally, and I haven't had a chance to discuss this with Steph, but yeah, that 12 to 13% range is, from a gut feel, is where you want to be sitting. If and that's your average for the year.
Thank you. Second question, Simon Chair. 6.2 there we mention exclusive productive work environment, manage your employer brand and reputation. So if I was to sort of say out of 1 to 10, 10 being really good, where would you think we are?
In terms of our employer reputation, or all those things added together?
The whole bit added together, really?
This is a very subjective question, but I think I would put us perhaps somewhere between 6 and 7. I absolutely think there's work that we can do, but we have made really good strides in the past few years. We had a significant increase in our employee engagement score in our engagement survey last year. Notwithstanding the fact that our turnover is higher at the moment than we really want, I think there's a number of factors feeding into there, and some are internal and some are external. We're no cot case or even close to it, but we've got room to move.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Barker first, and then I'll take Councillor Cook.
Just for information, Mr. Chairman, I just had a look at the Solomon report, which reports on New Zealand councils having a staff turnover rate of 13.3%. So we're not too bad, except going to 18% is way above that.
Thank you, Councillor Barker, for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Steph, it's more, isn't it? It's people we're talking about. It's not just percentages. So is part of your brief to identify why people are leaving, the reasons for it? Have you got some of your own that you think are bringing this about?
Yes, look, we do an exit survey. About half of our employees complete an online exit survey before around the time they leave the organisation. We've also got a couple of alternative sort of survey providers, but the online survey does seem to be people's preferred option.
Is it our systems, for example? Do our systems need looking at? Is it just... I'm thinking with our new chief executive now, there might be a rearranging of our whole procedures internally, and will that help you?
Yeah, look, I can't demonstrate that from the exit survey results. What comes through as, I have just written a report on this, so the, the items that people, I've just looked recently, we ask for a range of factors and ask people how satisfied they were with their experience with that, and it's a scale 1 to 5, where 1's extremely dissatisfied and 1 is extremely satisfied. One of the lowest items was people's physical workspace, so that is lowest rated equal with, in fact, people's interactions with elected members. However, when you look deeper into those things, they're very different results. The majority of people are reporting that they feel neutrally about interactions with elected members, whereas on the physical workspaces, 50% of people are saying they're extremely dissatisfied or dissatisfied, and almost 50% are saying satisfied or extremely satisfied. So, while that comes out with the same satisfaction, they tell us very different things. And the third one, I think, is around learning and development and career progression opportunities. Around lack of, I should say.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of other little questions just to inform me more than anything. Do we do most of our recruitment staff in-house?
Yes, we do. We do a small proportion through with the help of recruitment consultants.
I notice you're saying you're going that way more in your report. You're heading that way. Has that been fruitful? Has that been beneficial? Through the chair,
it's had mixed results. We have had some success, but there's been at least one recruitment in 2017 where we tried ourselves, we tried again ourselves, we went to a recruiter, they weren't able to find anyone, and we are now advertising again ourselves. So yes and no is the answer.
One quick one. Do you, when you're looking for people put talent in there as well? Do you factor that in at any stages? That's a very personal thing for me.
And by that, can I just check, do you mean are we looking for people who have good capacity for growth and future potential?
Yes, I think so. And but also that word talent. You know, if you're talking to them, you can glean from their replies and CVs some idea that there might be some talent could be developed there.
Yes, I think the answer is certainly yes. And, you know, when we, for instance, are seeking someone with a lesser degree of experience than we might initially have envisaged, then we're certainly looking for that future growth potential, their intellectual capacity, and we do critical reasoning assessments to gauge people's general level of intelligence for many of our recruitment activities. So, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Steph? Would somebody move that the report be received? Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Murray. Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Could somebody move that we go into public excluded, please? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Seconded by Mr. Murray. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. We have one item under public excluded. Are we offline? Thank you.